Her reflection in the glass case caught her eye, caramel dark skin contrasting with the crisp white collar of her work shirt, straight black hair falling just past her shoulders. She reached up unconsciously to smooth her eyebrow, a habit that surfaced whenever her thoughts started to spiral. "First day flying solo," she whispered to herself, adjusting the name tag pinned to her shirt. After 2 weeks of training, her manager had finally deemed her ready to handle the morning shift alone. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest, mixing with the familiar anxiety that had been her constant companion since moving to the city. The store wouldn't open for another 30 minutes, giving her time to pull out the small notebook she always carried. Its pages were filled with quotes, dreams, and fears, a private collection of her innermost thoughts. Today's entry was simple: Day 1 of proving myself, again. The sound of keys rattling against the back door made her quickly tuck the notebook away. Mrs. Hendricks, the store owner, walked in with her usual brisk energy. "Good morning, Noelle. Everything ready for opening?" "Yes, ma'am. I've checked all the displays and security systems just like you showed me." Mrs. Hendricks nodded approvingly, her silver hair catching the light. "Perfect. Remember, this isn't just about selling jewelry. It's about understanding stories. Every piece in here could be someone's promise, someone's memory." Noelle absorbed the words, adding them mentally to her collection of life lessons. Her Aunt Maylene, Aunt May as she'd always been known, had said something similar just that morning over breakfast. "Baby girl," Aunt May had declared, adjusting her vibrant yellow turban while sliding a plate of bacon across their tiny kitchen table, "everything in life tells a story. You just got to learn to listen." The memory of breakfast brought a mix of warmth and guilt. Aunt May had been coughing more than usual lately, though she insisted it was just seasonal allergies. Noelle had noticed the medicine bottles hidden behind the cereal boxes, but her aunt changed the subject whenever she tried to bring it up. The morning passed in a blur of customers, elderly women seeking repair services for cherished heirlooms, young professionals browsing for gifts, couples exploring engagement ring options with stars in their eyes. Noelle handled each interaction with careful attention, though her mind occasionally drifted to the stack of law books waiting at home. During a quiet moment, she pulled out her phone to check her study schedule. Property law readings for tomorrow, civil procedure assignment due Thursday, and a mock trial preparation that would require late nights at the library. The screen blurred slightly as fatigue crept in. "You can do this," she whispered, smoothing her eyebrow again. "One day at a time." The soft chime of the store's bell pulled her attention back to the present. A man walked in, his presence somehow both commanding and gentle. Tall, broad-shouldered, with kind blue-gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His well-maintained beard framed a thoughtful expression, and his work clothes, while clean and proper, showed signs of physical labor. "Welcome to Hendricks Fine Jewelry," Noelle said, her customer service voice automatically engaging. "How can I help you today?" The man approached the counter, running a hand along the nape of his neck, a gesture that softened his imposing frame. "Hi, I'm looking for a birthday gift for my sister. Something simple but special, if that makes sense. Of course, do you have any particular style in mind?" "To be honest, I'm a bit out of my depth here." He smiled apologetically, and Noelle noticed how it reached his eyes, creating small crinkles at the corners. "She's turning 30 next week. I fix networks for a living. Cables and connections make more sense to me than jewelry." Noelle found herself smiling back. "Well, connections are what jewelry is all about, in a way. Let's start with something simple. What's your sister's favorite color?" "Purple," he answered without hesitation. "She's loved it since we were kids." Noelle moved to a display case featuring amethyst pieces. These might be perfect then. They're elegant without being flashy. She carefully removed a silver necklace with a delicate amethyst pendant. "This one's particularly beautiful. The stone catches the light in a way that changes throughout the day." The man leaned in to look closer, and Noelle caught a subtle scent of clean soap and morning air. His name badge identified him as Lorenzo Owen, a technician from CityNet Solutions. "It's perfect," he said softly, then cleared his throat. "She'd love this. The way it catches the light, it reminds me of her, actually, always finding brightness in everything." As Noelle carefully wrapped the necklace, she found herself sharing glances with Lorenzo through the store's mirrors. Each time their eyes met, both would look away quickly, like teenagers caught passing notes in class. The interaction stirred something in her chest, a flutter of possibility that she immediately tried to suppress. Later that evening, as Noelle climbed the stairs to the small apartment she shared with Aunt May, exhaustion settled deep in her bones. The weight of her law books seemed to increase with each step. The sound of gospel music and the smell of comfort food greeted her before she even opened the door. "There's my girl," Aunt May called from the kitchen, her round figure swaying to the music as she stirred something on the stove. Her turban had shifted slightly to one side, giving her a charmingly crooked appearance. "How was your first solo flight?" Noelle dropped her bag and collapsed onto their worn but comfortable couch. "Good, I think. Didn't break anything, didn't lose anything, sold a few pieces." She hesitated, then added, "Met some interesting people." Aunt May's keen eyes caught the slight smile playing at the corners of her niece's mouth. "Interesting? Huh? Tell Aunt May all about these interesting people." "It's nothing," Noelle insisted, smoothing her eyebrow. "Just customers. One guy came in looking for a gift for his sister. He was—" She paused, searching for a neutral word. "Nice." "Nice?" Aunt May raised an eyebrow, her stirring spoon pausing mid-motion. "Girl, in all your years of existing, I have never heard you describe anyone as nice with that look on your face." A sudden coughing fit saved Noelle from having to respond. She watched with concern as her aunt turned away, shoulders shaking with each cough. "Aunt May, maybe we should see a doctor about that cough." "It's nothing, baby. Just this city air." "Taking some getting used to." Aunt May waved off the concern with her usual cheerful determination. "Now come help me with dinner, and you can tell me more about this nice customer of yours." As they worked together in their tiny kitchen, Noelle found her thoughts drifting back to Lorenzo's blue-gray eyes, and the way they seemed to see past her professional facade. She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on chopping vegetables and reviewing property law definitions in her head. She had too much at stake to get distracted. Her future, her family's hopes, her own dreams, they all depended on her focus and determination. Romance wasn't part of the plan, no matter how kind someone's eyes might be, or how genuine their smile. Still, as she lay in bed that night, her small notebook open beside her, she found herself writing, "Met someone today who reminded me that sometimes the most important connections aren't the ones we plan for." Then, shaking her head at her own sentimentality, she firmly closed the notebook and turned to her law textbooks. The city lights flickered outside her window, a constant reminder of all the dreams and challenges that had brought her here. Tomorrow would be another day of proving herself. Another day of balancing studies and work, of supporting Aunt May while pretending not to notice her hidden health concerns, of being everything to everyone while trying not to lose herself in the process. But tonight, just for a moment, she allowed herself to remember a pair of kind eyes and a gentle smile before turning her attention back to the responsibilities that couldn't wait. 3 days had passed since Lorenzo's visit to the jewelry store, but Noelle found herself unconsciously glancing at the door whenever the bell chimed. Each time she'd catch herself and return to whatever task was at hand, smoothing her eyebrow, in silent self-reproach. The morning rush at the university library was in full swing as Noelle claimed her usual corner spot, spreading her law books across the worn wooden table. The familiar scent of old books and coffee provided a comforting backdrop to her studying routine. Her property law professor had a reputation for calling on students at random, and she refused to be caught unprepared. "The rule against perpetuities," she muttered, highlighting another passage. "An interest must vest, if at all, no later than 21 years after the death of some life in being at the creation of the interest." The words blurred together as she suppressed a yawn. A text message notification lit up her phone screen. "Baby girl, don't forget to eat something. Love, Aunt May." Attached was a photo of the lunch bag Noelle had forgotten on the kitchen counter that morning. The sight made her smile and ache at the same time. She'd heard her aunt's muffled coughing through the walls last night, despite the radio playing to mask the sound. Still burning the midnight oil? Noelle looked up to find her classmate Deanna sliding into the chair across from her. With her immaculate business casual attire and perfectly styled braids, Deanna embodied the polished law student image Noelle sometimes felt she was still struggling to achieve. "More like trying not to drown in property law," Noelle admitted, reaching for her now cold coffee. "How do you always look so put together?" Deanna laughed softly. "Years of practice and way too much coffee. But seriously, you're one of the sharpest people in our class. Stop doubting yourself." She paused, studying Noelle's face. "Though you seem different today, distracted. Spill." Noelle focused on reorganizing her highlighters. "It's nothing. Just tired." "Uh-huh. And I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court." Deanna leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Come on. We've been study buddies since orientation. I know you're just tired, face, and this isn't it." Before Noelle could respond, her phone buzzed with a notification from work. Mrs. Hendricks needed her to come in early. A shipment of new inventory had arrived ahead of schedule. Gathering her books, Noelle promised Deanna they'd catch up later. The jewelry store was quiet when Noelle arrived, early afternoon sun casting prisms through the display windows. As she helped Mrs. Hendricks unpack the new pieces, her mind wandered to Lorenzo. Had his sister liked the necklace? Would he come back? Should she even want him to? The bell chimed. Noelle's heart skipped before she could stop it. But it wasn't. Lorenzo. Just a couple looking for wedding bands. She helped them with practiced professionalism, ignoring the slight disappointment in her chest. Hours passed. She was updating the inventory system when the bell chimed again. This time, when she looked up, familiar blue-gray eyes met hers. Lorenzo stood just inside the door, adjusting the sleeve of his work shirt, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of nervousness. His tool belt was slung over his shoulder, and his hands showed traces of the day's work. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she echoed, her own voice softer than intended. "How did your sister like the necklace?" He moved closer to the counter, a gentle smile warming his features. "She loved it. Actually, that's partly why I'm here. The clasp seems a bit loose. I was hoping you could take a look." Noelle held out her hand, and Lorenzo placed the necklace in her palm. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. She focused intently on examining the clasp, aware of his presence just across the counter. "It just needs a small adjustment," she said finally, reaching for her tools. "It'll only take a minute." "No rush," Lorenzo replied, leaning slightly against the counter. "Unless you're busy?" Noelle glanced up, catching something hopeful in his expression. "Not too busy," she said carefully. "Quiet afternoon." As she worked on the clasp, Lorenzo spoke about his day, fixing network issues across the city, climbing through dusty crawl spaces, dealing with temperamental servers. His voice was steady and calming, like a warm drink on a cold day. "Sometimes I think I spend more time talking to machines than people," he admitted, running a hand along his nape. "At least machines are straightforward," Noelle found herself saying. "They either work or they don't. People are complicated." Lorenzo's eyes met hers. "Some complications are worth figuring out, though, aren't they?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Noelle's fingers stilled on the necklace as she looked up at him. For a moment, neither spoke, but the silence felt like a conversation of its own. The spell broke when Noelle's phone buzzed loudly. A text from Aunt May. "Groceries needed. Don't forget it's your turn to cook tonight." Reality crashed back in. She had a civil procedure assignment due tomorrow, groceries to buy, dinner to cook, and a test to study for. This, whatever this was with Lorenzo, wasn't part of the plan. "The clasp is fixed," she said, carefully wrapping the necklace. "Good as new." Lorenzo accepted the package, his fingers lingering near hers for a moment. "Thank you, I should probably—" He gestured vaguely toward the door, then hesitated. "Actually, I was wondering—" The bell chimed again as new customers entered. Noelle straightened professionally, though her heart was racing. "Have a good day, Mr. Owen." He nodded, understanding the shift. "You too, Ms. Parker." That evening, as Noelle pushed a shopping cart through the grocery store, her mind kept replaying the almost question in Lorenzo's voice. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down on her shoulders. Law school work, Aunt May's health, her own dreams. She couldn't afford distractions. Yet when she reached for a box of pasta, she found herself remembering the warmth of his fingers brushing against hers, the genuine interest in his eyes when he listened to her speak. Back at the apartment, she found Aunt May doing her evening exercises to a video program, her bright orange turban slightly askew. The older woman paused the video when she saw Noelle's expression. "Something on your mind, baby?" Noelle busied herself with unpacking groceries. "Just thinking about school stuff." "Mm-hmm. And does this school stuff happen to have blue-gray eyes and a nice smile?" Noelle nearly dropped the tomatoes she was holding. "Aunt May, what? These old eyes might be failing, but they can still spot love when it's blooming." Aunt May's teasing tone softened. "You know, it's okay to let good things happen, even when life is complicated." "I can't," Noelle said quietly, smoothing her eyebrow. "There's too much at stake. Law school, work. Me?" Aunt May stepped closer, placing her hands on Noelle's shoulders. "Baby girl, don't you dare use me as an excuse to hide from life. I raised you to soar, not to be afraid of leaving the ground." A coughing fit interrupted her words, and Noelle quickly guided her aunt to a chair, fetching water and trying not to notice how the cough seemed deeper than before. Later that night, alone in her room, Noelle opened her notebook. Under the day's date, she wrote, "Sometimes the scariest part isn't failing. It's wanting something so much that succeeding would change everything." She closed the notebook and turned to her law books, but her mind kept drifting to blue-gray eyes and unasked questions, to the way silence could feel like the safest kind of conversation, and to the possibility that some complications might indeed be worth figuring out. The mock trial preparation room buzzed with nervous energy as law students shuffled papers and adjusted their formal attire. Noelle stood before a wall mirror, straightening her blazer for the 5th time. The case materials for their practice, litigation felt heavy in her hands, a complex property dispute that would test everything they'd learned so far. "All rise," Professor Morgan's voice cut through the chatter. "Remember, even though this is practice, the skills you demonstrate today could shape your entire career. Miss Parker, you'll be presenting first." Noelle's heart jumped to her throat. She'd expected to go last, having time to observe others. Smoothing her eyebrow, she gathered her materials and approached the podium. Just as she opened her mouth to begin her opening statement, a loud crash echoed through the building, followed by darkness. Power outage. Emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow across the room. Professor Morgan sighed. "Everyone stay calm. Maintenance has been notified." Minutes ticked by. The backup generator should have kicked in, but something was clearly wrong. Noelle's carefully prepared notes were barely readable in the dim light, and her chance to prove herself was slipping away. "The IT team is sending someone up," Professor Morgan announced, checking his phone. "Apparently there's an issue with the building's network affecting the backup systems." The door opened, and Noelle's breath caught. Lorenzo stepped in, tool belt at his waist, looking professional and focused. Their eyes met briefly, surprise mirrored in both expressions. "Afternoon," he said, addressing the room, but his gaze lingering on Noelle. "I'll need to check the main network panel. Shouldn't take long." As Lorenzo worked, Noelle tried to concentrate on her notes, but found herself watching his methodical movements. He seemed different here, more assured in his element. His hands moved with precise confidence across the equipment, a stark contrast to his nervous gestures in the jewelry store. "Almost got it," he murmured, more to himself than the room. Then, with a soft hum, the lights blazed back to life. The AI computer systems whirred awake, and a collective sigh of relief filled the room. "Thank you," Professor Morgan said. "Ms. Parker, whenever you're ready." Noelle stepped forward, but as she did, her heel caught on the carpet. Case files scattered across the floor. Before she could move, Lorenzo was there, helping gather the papers. Their hands met over a document about easements and property rights. "You've got this," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Something in his voice steadied her. Noelle took her place at the podium, drew a deep breath, and began. The arguments flowed smoothly, her voice growing stronger with each point. When she finished, even Professor Morgan looked impressed. "Excellent work, Ms. Parker. A thoroughly professional presentation." As the next student took the podium, Noelle noticed Lorenzo finishing up his work. He closed the panel quietly and headed for the door, pausing only to give her a small nod. She wanted to thank him for the help, for the encouragement, for believing in her when her own confidence wavered. But the moment passed, and he was gone. Later that afternoon, during her shift at the jewelry store, Noelle found herself distracted by thoughts of their brief interaction. The way he'd appeared just when everything seemed to be falling apart, how natural it felt to have him there. "Earth to Noelle," Mrs. Hendricks's voice snapped her back to reality. "The insurance assessor needs last month's inventory reports." "Right, sorry." Noelle dove into the filing cabinet, grateful for the distraction. But as she sorted through papers, her phone buzzed with a text from Aunt May. "Baby girl, don't wait up tonight, book club running late." Noelle frowned. Aunt May never stayed out late on weeknights, and she'd been coughing more than usual at breakfast. Something felt off. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of customers and paperwork. As closing time approached, the bell chimed one last time. Lorenzo walked in, still in his work clothes, looking slightly uncertain. "Hi," he said, adjusting his sleeve. "I was in the neighborhood, finishing up some calls, and I thought—" He trailed off, then started again. "You were really impressive today, in the mock trial." Noelle felt warmth spread across her cheeks. "Thank you for everything, helping with the papers, the encouragement." "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said softly. "They wouldn't." A comfortable silence settled between them. Lorenzo moved closer to the counter, his presence both calming and exhilarating. "Listen," he began. "I know you're busy with school and work, but I was wondering if maybe—" Noelle's phone rang, Aunt May's ringtone cutting through the moment. Something in her aunt's voice when she answered made her blood run cold. "Noelle, I'm at the hospital. Just a precaution, but—" A coughing fit interrupted her words. "Which hospital? I'm coming right now." Noelle's hands shook as she gathered her things. Lorenzo's expression shifted from disappointment to concern. "What's wrong?" "My aunt, she's in the hospital. I have to go, but the store—" "I'll wait while you close up," he said firmly. "Then I'm driving you there." "You don't have to—" "I want to." His voice was gentle but resolute. "Please let me help." 20 minutes later, they were in Lorenzo's truck, navigating through evening traffic. Noelle's fingers kept smoothing her eyebrow, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. "She'll be okay," Lorenzo said quietly, reading her anxiety. "Focus on breathing." At a red light, he reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. The simple gesture grounded her, providing an anchor in the storm of her thoughts. They found Aunt May in the emergency room, hooked up to monitors, but still wearing her bright turban. Today's was purple with gold patterns. She tried to smile when she saw Noelle, but another cough shook her small frame. "It's just bronchitis," she managed between coughs. "Nothing to worry about." But the doctor's expression said otherwise. "Ms. Parker, the X-rays show something. Hey, we need to discuss—" Noelle felt her world tilting. Behind her, Lorenzo's steady presence provided silent support. She hadn't asked him to stay, but he had, positioning himself like a shield between her and whatever chaos might come. As the doctor explained the situation, chronic condition, required tests, potential treatments, Noelle felt tears threatening to fall. She wouldn't cry, couldn't cry. She needed to be strong to handle this too. A warm hand touched her shoulder. Lorenzo pressed a tissue into her palm, the gesture so natural it almost broke her composure completely. "I'm fine," Aunt May insisted from her bed. "Just need some rest," and another cough interrupted her brave face. "You're staying overnight for observation," the doctor said firmly. "We need to run more tests in the morning." Hours passed in a blur of forms and questions. Lorenzo disappeared briefly and returned with coffee and sandwiches. When Noelle protested that he didn't need to stay, he simply pulled up a chair and said, "I know." Finally, around midnight, with Aunt May sleeping peacefully and initial treatments underway, The nurse insisted Noelle go home and rest. "I'll be back first thing tomorrow," she promised her aunt's sleeping form. In Lorenzo's truck heading home, the events of the day felt surreal. The mock trial seemed like weeks ago instead of hours. "Thank you," Noelle said softly, "for everything." Lorenzo glanced at her, his blue-gray eyes serious. "You don't have to thank me, that's what—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That's what people do when they care." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. When they reached her apartment, Lorenzo walked her to the door. "Will you be okay?" he asked. Noelle looked up at him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm stronger with people who care." Their gazes held for a long moment. Then, with gentle determination, Lorenzo pulled her into a hug. Noelle found herself melting into his embrace, letting out a shaky breath. She didn't know she'd been holding. "You're not alone in this," he murmured into her hair. When they finally parted, Noelle felt both steadier and more uncertain than ever. She watched him drive away, then entered her empty apartment. On the kitchen counter, Aunt May's coffee mug still sat from that morning, next to her half-finished crossword puzzle. Opening her notebook, Noelle wrote, "Sometimes strength isn't about carrying the weight alone. It's about learning to trust someone else to help you carry it." She closed the notebook and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more tests, more decisions. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the lingering warmth of Lorenzo's embrace and the comfort of knowing that whatever came next, she didn't have to face it alone. Morning light crept through the hospital window, painting soft shadows across Aunt May's sleeping face. Noelle sat in the now familiar visitor's chair, law books spread across her lap, though she'd barely read a page in the last hour. A week had passed since the emergency room visit, and the initial diagnosis had led to more tests, more concerns, more whispered consultations in hospital hallways. Pneumonia complicated by an underlying condition. Words like chronic and progressive floated through her mind, each one carrying the weight of future worries. The doctors were optimistic about treatment, but the road ahead wouldn't be easy. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Lorenzo stood there holding 2 coffee cups and a paper bag that smelled of fresh pastries. He'd been appearing like this every morning before his work rounds, a steady presence in the chaos of her new reality. "You didn't have to come again," Noelle said softly, though her heart lifted at the sight of him. "I know." He handed her a coffee, prepared exactly how she liked it, with just a hint of cinnamon. "How's she doing today?" "Better. The new medication seems to be helping with the coughing." Noelle took a sip of coffee, letting its warmth spread through her tired body. They might release her tomorrow if the final tests look good. Lorenzo pulled up the other chair, careful not to make noise. "And how are you doing?" The question, asked with such genuine concern, almost broke through her carefully maintained composure. Noelle smoothed her eyebrow, buying time to steady her voice. "I'm fine. Just need to figure out how to balance everything." "Everything meaning law school, work and being here, and finding a way to afford the treatments, and making sure she actually takes her medicine and—" Noelle stopped herself, realizing she was letting her fears spill out. "Sorry, you probably have work to get to." Instead of leaving, Lorenzo reached over and gently closed the law book in her lap. "Talk to me," he said simply. Something about his calm presence made it feel safe to be vulnerable. "I'm scared," Noelle admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just about Aunt May, but about failing her. She gave up everything to raise me after my parents died, and now when she needs me— "You're here," Lorenzo interrupted softly. "Every morning, every evening, between classes, between shifts. That's not failing. But what if it's not enough? What if I can't handle it all? Then you let people help." His blue-gray eyes held hers steadily. "You're not alone in this, remember?" Before Noelle could respond, Aunt May stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Is that coffee I smell?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "And fresh croissants," Lorenzo added, standing to adjust her pillows. "The bakery downstairs just opened." Such a thoughtful young man, Aunt May said, giving Noel a meaningful look. Reminds me of your Uncle Howard, always bringing me little surprises when we were courting. Aunt May. Noel felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Lorenzo just smiled, helping Aunt May sit up. I'd love to hear about Uncle Howard sometime. Noel doesn't share many family stories. Oh, I have stories. Aunt May's eyes twinkled despite her tired face. Like the time little Noel decided she was going to be a Supreme Court justice at age 7. Wore her Halloween judge costume for 3 weeks straight. Really? Lorenzo glanced at Noel, his expression soft with affection. Don't encourage her, Noel groaned, but she was smiling too. It felt good to see Aunt May's spirit returning, even if it was at the expense of her dignity. A nurse entered with morning medications, and Lorenzo excused himself for work. At the door, he paused. I'm installing new networks on the 3rd floor today. Text me if you need anything. Noel nodded, warmth spreading through her chest at his thoughtfulness. After he left, Aunt May didn't even try to hide her approval. That boy's got it bad for you, baby girl. He's just being kind, Noel protested, though her heart fluttered. At the thought. Kind is holding a door open. That man's been here every morning for a week, bringing coffee and hope in equal measures. Aunt May's voice softened. And the way he looks at you. That's not kindness. That's love growing. Love? Noel nearly choked on the word. It's way too soon for... Too soon for what? A new voice joined the conversation. Deanna stood in the doorway, carrying a bright bouquet of flowers. Please tell me I'm finally going to hear about the mysterious man who's got my study partner distracted lately. There's nothing to tell, Noel insisted, but Aunt May was already waving Deanna in eagerly. Come sit, child. Let me tell you about this wonderful young man who's been taking care of our Noel. As Aunt May launched into a detailed description of Lorenzo's daily visits, Noel buried herself in her property law notes, trying to ignore the knowing looks between her aunt and her friend. But her mind kept drifting to the gentle way Lorenzo had closed her book, how he seemed to understand exactly what she needed, without her having to ask. The morning passed quickly. Deanna left for class, promising to share her notes from the E. Lectures Noel had missed. Doctors came and went, each bringing cautiously optimistic updates. Around noon, Noel's phone buzzed with a text from Lorenzo. Taking my lunch break. Need anything from the cafeteria? Before she could reply, another message appeared. And don't say you're fine. I know you haven't eaten since that croissant. Noel felt a smile tugging at her lips. How did he know her so well already? See, Aunt May said, catching her expression. That's not the smile of just friends. You should be resting, Noel deflected, adjusting her aunt's blankets. I'll rest when you admit that boy's special. He is, Noel conceded quietly, but that's what scares me. Aunt May reached for her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Love's supposed to be a little scary, baby girl. If it doesn't shake you, up some, it's probably not the real thing. Who said anything about love? But even as she protested, Noel knew something profound was shifting in her heart. Every morning she told herself not to expect Lorenzo's visits, and every morning her heart lifted at the sight of him. Every time she insisted they were just friends, her soul whispered that friends didn't make your world feel more complete just by existing in it. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the hospital corridors to get some air, Noel found herself near the 3rd floor where Lorenzo was working. Through an open maintenance door, she heard his voice giving instructions to his team, confident and clear. She lingered for a moment, not wanting to interrupt, but drawing comfort from his nearness. As if sensing her presence, he looked up. Their eyes met across the hallway, and without a word he smiled, that special smile that seemed reserved just for her. In that moment, Noel realized with startling clarity that Aunt May was right. This wasn't just kindness or attraction or friendship. This was the beginning of love, growing in the quiet moments between coffee cups and hospital visits, in shared glances and unspoken understanding, in the way he made her feel both stronger and more vulnerable at the same time. Back in her aunt's room, Noel opened her notebook and wrote, "Sometimes love doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, in morning coffee and gentle hands, in knowing looks and silent support. And maybe that's the kind that lasts, the love that builds itself day by day, moment by moment, until you can't remember what life felt like before it began. She closed the notebook just as Lorenzo appeared with lunch for both her and Aunt May. As he arranged the food with careful attention to detail, Noelle watched him and allowed herself, for the first time, to acknowledge the truth she'd been trying to deny. She was falling in love with Lorenzo Owen, and it was both the most terrifying and most natural thing in the world. The first day of Aunt May's return home brought a flurry of activity to their small apartment. Noelle had spent the previous evening organizing medications, preparing meals in advance, and rearranging furniture to make everything more accessible. Now, watching her aunt settle into her favorite armchair, wrapped in a bright yellow shawl that matched her turban, Noelle felt both relief and anxiety. "Stop hovering, baby girl," Aunt May said, though her voice held more affection than reproach. "I'm not made of glass. The doctor said you need to take it easy," Noelle reminded her, adjusting a pillow for the third time. "No book club meetings, no dance exercise videos, and definitely no—" A knock at the door interrupted her list of restrictions. Lorenzo stood in the hallway, holding a toolbox and what looked like some electronic equipment. "Hi," he said, adjusting his sleeve with his free hand. "I thought maybe I could set up some monitors for tracking temperature and air quality." He looked almost shy about the suggestion. It might help with the breathing issues. Noelle felt warmth spread through her chest at his thoughtfulness. "For you don't have to—" "Let the man in, Noelle," Aunt May called from her chair. "Lord knows we could use some technical expertise in this house, and some good-looking company wouldn't hurt either." "Aunt May!" But Noelle was already stepping aside to let Lorenzo enter, their shoulders brushing slightly in the narrow doorway. The brief contact sent a familiar flutter through her stomach. As Lorenzo set up his equipment, explaining each piece to an intrigued Aunt May, Noelle found herself watching him. The way his hands moved with confident precision, so different from his nervous gestures. The gentle patience in his voice as he answered her aunt's questions. The way he seemed to fit naturally into their space, as if he'd always belonged there. "Now this one," he was saying, holding up a small device, "monitors humidity levels. Too much moisture can aggravate respiratory issues, but too little isn't good either. It'll send alerts to your phone if anything needs adjusting." "To my phone?" Aunt May's eyes lit up. "Well, isn't that something? Noelle, honey, you'll have to show me how to work those alert things." "I can help with that," Lorenzo offered. "I'll write down all the instructions, make it simple." A coughing fit interrupted Aunt May's response. Noelle rushed forward with water and medication, but Lorenzo was already there, helping her aunt sit up straighter, adjusting the pillow behind her back with natural ease. "Easy breaths," he said softly, like the respiratory therapist showed. "Us, remember? Us." The word struck Noelle. Somewhere in the past weeks, Lorenzo had become part of their us, present for doctor's visits, familiar with medications and treatments, integrated into their daily rhythms. When the coughing subsided, Aunt May patted Lorenzo's hand. "You're a good man, Lorenzo Owen. Reminds me of when Howard and I first met. He was always fixing things too, though back then it was radios, not all this fancy technology." "I'd love to hear that story," Lorenzo said, settling on the floor near her chair. Noelle watched as her aunt launched into the tale of meeting Uncle Howard at a radio repair shop in 1989. Lorenzo listened attentively, asking questions at just the right moments, his presence bringing a warmth to their home that had nothing to do with the temperature monitors he'd installed. Her phone buzzed, a reminder about tomorrow's civil procedure exam. Reality crashed back in. She still had chapters to review, cases to memorize. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down again. As if sensing her tension, Lorenzo glanced. Up. Their eyes met, and without words he understood. Standing smoothly, he gathered his tools. "I should let you get to your studying. The monitors are all set up, and I've programmed my number into the alert system in case there are any technical issues." "Thank you," Noelle said softly, walking him to the door. "For everything." In the hallway they stood close, the narrow space making their proximity feel both intimate and uncertain. Lorenzo reached up, his fingers barely brushing her arm. Noel, yes? Her heart raced at the intensity in his eyes, but before he could continue, a door slammed somewhere in the building, breaking the moment. Lorenzo stepped back slightly, running a hand along his nape. Good luck with your exam tomorrow. You'll do great. Noel watched him leave, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. Back inside, Aunt May was wearing her knowing smile. That boy was trying to ask you something important, she said, and you were ready to hear it. I have to study, Noel deflected, reaching for her law books. But her mind kept drifting to the unfinished moment in the hallway, to all the words hanging unspoken between them. Hours later, after Aunt May had gone to bed, Noel sat at their small kitchen table surrounded by textbooks and notes. The apartment felt different now, almost like it held echoes of Lorenzo's presence, in the quiet hum of the monitors he'd installed, in the detailed instructions he'd written in his neat handwriting, in the lingering sense of security his care had created. Opening her notebook, she wrote, "There are moments when everything changes, not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in quiet acts of care, in gentle touches that speak louder than words, in the way someone can make a space feel more like home just by being in it." A soft ding from one of the monitors drew her attention. The temperature had dropped slightly. Without thinking, she reached for her phone, but another message was already there. Saw the temperature alert. Already adjusted the settings remotely. Don't worry, focus on studying, you've got this. Noel stared at Lorenzo's message, feeling something shift in her heart. This man who fixed not just machines but moments, who understood her without words, who had woven himself so seamlessly into her life that she couldn't imagine it without him anymore. A memory surfaced. Her 7-year-old self in that Halloween. Judge costume, declaring to Aunt May that she would never let anything distract her from her dreams. But now, looking at Lorenzo's message, she wondered if maybe some distractions weren't distractions at all, but rather the dreams themselves taking a different shape than expected. Rising quietly, she went to check on Aunt May. Her aunt slept, peacefully, her breathing steady, surrounded by the quiet guardianship of Lorenzo's monitors. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Noel noticed something she'd missed earlier. Lorenzo had labeled each device with not just instructions, but small, encouraging notes. For better breathing, because your stories make the world brighter. Temperature perfect for turban modeling sessions. Air quality monitor, keeping watch while you rest. Each note showed how well he'd come to know them, how much he cared about the details of their lives. Noel felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of worry or exhaustion. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing what had been growing all along, as natural as breathing. Back at her study table, she found herself reading the same legal paragraph over and over, her mind full of blue-gray eyes and gentle hands and unfinished sentences in hallways. Tomorrow's exam suddenly felt less daunting, not because it was less important, but because she was beginning to understand that having someone to lean on didn't make her any less strong. Her phone lit up with another message from Lorenzo. "Get some sleep, you're ready for tomorrow." 4 simple words, but they carried the weight of all his quiet support, all his unspoken care. Noel smiled, finally allowing herself to embrace the truth that had been building in her heart. Some things were worth the risk of changing everything. The jewelry store sparkled in the late afternoon sun, diamonds casting tiny rainbows across the walls. Noel stood behind the counter, absently polishing an already gleaming display case. Her civil procedure exam had gone well, better than well, actually, but her mind wasn't on law school today. It had been 3 days since the moment in the hallway with Lorenzo, 3 days of meaningful glances and almost conversations, of text messages that seemed to carry more weight than their simple words suggested. 3 days of wondering what he had been about to say before that door slammed. The bell chimed, and Noel looked up to find Deanna striding in, her braids swinging with determined energy. "Okay, enough," Deanna declared, placing both hands on the counter. "You've been floating around campus like a lovesick teenager, and I need details." "I have not been floating," Noel protested, smoothing her eyebrow. "And I'm working." "Please, the store's empty, and Mrs. Hendricks is at that jewelry convention in Boston." Deanna gestured around the quiet space. So, Spill, what's happening with Mr. Fix-It? Before Noelle could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from Lorenzo. Hope your day's going well. The humidity monitor caught something this morning. Stopped by to check on Aunt May during lunch. All good now. She made me try her new curry recipe. A smile spread across her face before she could hide it. That's it, Deanna exclaimed. That's the floating look I'm talking about. Girl, you are in deep. It's complicated, Noelle sighed. But even she heard the weakness in her protest. What's complicated? He's clearly crazy about you. He's practically part of your family already. Aunt May adores him. And don't think I haven't noticed how you light up every time he's around. But what if... Noelle stopped, trying to organize her swirling thoughts. What if we try and it doesn't work? What if I mess everything up? He's become so important to Aunt May, to our whole situation. Or what if you don't try and spend the rest of your life wondering? Deanna's voice softened. Look, I know you've got a lot on your plate. Law school, work, Aunt May's health, it's a lot. But maybe having someone to share it with makes it lighter, not heavier. The bell chimed again. This time it was Lorenzo who walked in, looking slightly nervous but determined. He carried a small paper bag and what appeared to be a folder of some kind. Hi, he said, his eyes finding Noelle's immediately. Hi, she echoed, her heart doing that now familiar flutter. Well, would you look at the time? Deanna announced with exaggerated surprise. I have that thing. You know, that very important thing, somewhere else. She winked at Noelle before heading to the door, pausing only to whisper, Don't float away completely. Once they were alone, Lorenzo approached the counter, adjusting his sleeve. I, brought you something. He placed the paper bag in front of her. You mentioned the other day that you missed your mum's apple turnovers. I found a bakery that makes them the old-fashioned way. Noelle opened the bag, the familiar scent bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. How did you remember? That? I barely mentioned it weeks ago. I remember everything you say, he admitted quietly. Then, as if realizing how intense that sounded, he quickly held up the folder. I also wanted to show you something. Remember how you were worried about the medical bills? Noelle tensed slightly. She hadn't wanted to burden him with their financial concerns. I did some research, he continued. There's this program for long-term care support. Aunt May would qualify. And here, he opened the folder, revealing carefully organized documents. I found some grants for law students with family medical obligations. You could apply for both. Noelle stared at the papers, then at Lorenzo, overwhelmed by the thought and care behind this gesture. You did all this research? I just want to help make things easier for you. He ran a hand along his nape. Both of you. You're... He paused, seeming to gather courage. You're important to me. The air between them felt charged with possibility. Noelle found herself moving around the counter, drawn toward him like a magnet finding its pole. Lorenzo, The store phone rang, shattering the moment. Mrs. Hendricks calling about inventory numbers. By the time Noelle finished the call, the space between them had widened again, filled with unspoken words. I should go, Lorenzo said softly. You probably need to focus on work. Wait. Noelle surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. Please. He waited, his blue-grey eyes watching her with that mixture of hope and uncertainty she'd come to know so well. The other day, in the hallway, she began, smoothing her eyebrow nervously. What were you going to say? Lorenzo took a step. Closer. I was going to ask if you'd like to have dinner with me, not coffee between hospital visits or quick lunches between your classes. Real dinner. Just us. Like a date? Noelle's voice was barely above a whisper. Like a beginning, he answered. Then with gentle humor, though technically we've been sort of dating for weeks now, I just bring technical equipment instead of flowers. A laugh bubbled up from Noelle's chest, releasing weeks of tension. You bring me way more than flowers. You bring peace and possibility. And this time, when Lorenzo stepped closer, neither of them pulled away. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb gently, brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. And? He prompted softly. Instead of answering, Noelle rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was gentle at first, a whisper of a kiss, but it held all the words they hadn't been able to say. Lorenzo's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and the world seemed to narrow to just this moment, just them. When they finally parted, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you helped me pick out that necklace for my sister." "Your sister's necklace?" Noelle laughed softly. "The one with the suspiciously loose clasp that needed fixing." "Hey, that clasp was genuinely loose, and eventually, after I might have fiddled with it a bit." They shared another laugh, still holding each other. Through the store windows, the setting sun painted everything in warm gold, making the moment feel almost magical. "So," Lorenzo said, pulling back slightly to meet her eyes. "Dinner?" "Dinner," Noelle agreed. Then, because honesty felt important, "I'm still scared. Of everything changing, of not being able to balance it all." "I know." He touched her cheek again. "But maybe some changes are worth being scared for, and maybe you don't have to balance everything alone anymore." Later that night, after Lorenzo had left with promises of dinner plans and several more kisses, Noelle opened her notebook. Under the day's date, she wrote, "Love doesn't always come in grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it comes in apple turnovers and technical manuals, in research about medical programs and gentle hands wiping away tears. Sometimes it's not about finding someone who changes your world, but someone who helps you carry it." She closed the notebook and touched her lips, still feeling the echo of their first kiss. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time in weeks, the future didn't feel overwhelming. It felt full of promise. Friday evening. Found Noelle standing before her bedroom mirror, smoothing her emerald green dress for the 10th time. Her reflection showed a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This would be their first real date, and somehow that felt more significant than all the quiet moments they'd already shared. "Stop fussing," Aunt May called from the doorway, her bright orange turban coordinating perfectly with her flowing caftan. "You look beautiful, baby girl. Are you sure you'll be okay?" Noelle turned to her aunt, smoothing her eyebrow out of habit. "I can tell Lorenzo we should reschedule if—" "Don't you dare!" Aunt May settled into Noelle's desk chair, her breathing steady and strong today. "I've got my monitors, my medication, and a new mystery novel. Plus Deanna's bringing over dinner and staying to watch that new legal drama with me." She grinned mischievously. "We're going to critique all the incorrect courtroom procedures." A knock at the front door sent Noelle's heart racing. She heard Deanna, who had arrived early, greeting Lorenzo. "Remember," Aunt May squeezed her, "and just because something's precious doesn't mean it has to be perfect." Noelle stepped into the living room to find Lorenzo in a charcoal grey suit that made his blue-grey eyes even more striking. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers, and his expression when he saw her made her cheeks warm. "You look—" He paused, searching for words. "If you say nice, I'm sending you both back to romance school," Deanna interjected from the kitchen. Lorenzo laughed, the sound breaking through his nervousness. "I was going to say breathtaking, actually." He handed Noelle the flowers. "These reminded me of you. Beautiful but not delicate. Strong enough to grow anywhere." "Smooth," Deanna approved. "He can stay." After promises to call if anything changed with Aunt May, and several knowing looks from both Deanna and her aunt, Noelle found herself walking with Lorenzo through the early evening air. His hand found hers naturally, their fingers intertwining, as if they'd been doing this forever. "So," Noelle said, trying to calm her butterflies, "where are we going?" Lorenzo's eyes held a hint of mystery. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, surprising herself with how true it was. He led her to his truck, helping her in with gentle courtesy. They drove through the city, talking easily about their days, a difficult network installation for him, a challenging study group for her. It felt both familiar and new, like a favorite song played in a different key. When they parked, Noelle looked around curiously. They were at the edge of the city's botanical gardens, but it was well past closing time. "Don't worry," Lorenzo said, reading her expression. "I know someone who works here. Actually," he adjusted his sleeve slightly, "I help maintain their environmental control systems. They owed me a favor." He guided her through a side gate, and along a winding path lit by subtle ground lights. They emerged into a glass-enclosed courtyard where a small table had been set for dinner, surrounded by blooming night flowers and softly glowing lanterns. "Lorenzo," Noelle breathed, taking in the magical setting. "Too much?" He ran a hand along his nape. "I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere we could just be us. And you mentioned once that you loved gardens, but never had time to visit anymore." Noelle turned to him, heart full. "It's perfect." Dinner was a delicious array of dishes from a local restaurant they'd both mentioned wanting to try. They talked about everything and nothing: childhood memories, future dreams, silly stories about their worst technical and legal mishaps. In the gentle evening light, surrounded by flowers that only bloomed at night, it felt like they were in their own private world. "You know," Lorenzo said as they shared a dessert of chocolate mousse, "I almost didn't come back to the jewelry store after buying my sister's necklace." "Really?" Noelle tilted her head curiously. "I was convinced you were way out of my league." "This brilliant law student with the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen," he met her eyes. "But then I kept thinking about the way you listened, really listened, when I rambled about network cables, and how your eyes lit up when you talked. About your aunt, I had to see you again." "I'm glad you did," Noelle said softly. "Even if you did have to sabotage a perfectly good necklace clasp. Worth it." His smile was tender. "Every nervous moment, every excuse to come back, all worth it to be here with you now." After dinner, they walked through the gardens, Lorenzo pointing out the environmental controls he'd helped install, Noelle sharing fragments of plant law history she'd studied. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by comfortable silences and gentle touches. Near a fountain filled with water lilies, Lorenzo pulled her close. "I know we're technically just starting," he said quietly, "but it feels like I've known you forever." "I know what you mean." Noelle rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "Like we've been writing this story all along, just in invisible ink." He tilted her chin up gently, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. This kiss was different from their first, unhurried, deep, full of promise. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lorenzo touched his forehead to hers. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he whispered. "Actually, no, I know I am." Instead of the fear she'd expected to feel at those words, Noelle felt peace wash over her. "I think I'm falling in love with you too. Or maybe I already have. Been between all the hospital visits and monitor installations and Apple turnovers." They shared another kiss, softer this time, before reluctantly acknowledging the time. As they drove home, their hands remained linked over the center console, and Noelle felt a new certainty settling in her heart. At her door, Lorenzo kissed her goodnight with such tenderness it almost brought tears to her eyes. "Sweet dreams," he murmured. Inside, she found Aunt May and Deanna still awake, clearly waiting up for her. Their eager expressions made her laugh. "Well?" Aunt May demanded. "Was it worth changing out of your study clothes for?" "It was." Noelle searched for words that could capture the evening's magic. It was the beginning of something real. Later, in her room, she opened her notebook and wrote, "Love isn't just grand gestures in garden courtyards or declarations under the stars. It's in the way he remembers tiny details from passing conversations, in how he makes space for all of me. The law student, the caregiver, the dreamer. It's in the perfect balance of holding me close while helping me stand strong." Tonight wasn't just a first date. It was a promise that some loves grow like night-blooming flowers, quietly, steadily, until suddenly you look up and realize your whole world is in bloom. She closed the notebook and touched the dried wildflower she'd saved from his bouquet. Outside, the city hummed its nighttime melody, but for once her mind wasn't on tomorrow's responsibilities. Instead, she thought of blue-gray eyes and gentle hands, of gardens at twilight and promises whispered against her lips. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lorenzo. "Thank you for trusting me with your evening, and your heart." Noelle smiled, typing back, "Thank you for making both so beautiful." As she drifted off to sleep, she realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't worried about balancing everything perfectly. Some things like love and trust and hope had a way of finding their own balance when you let them bloom in their own time. The autumn rain pelted against the hospital windows as Noelle paced the waiting room, smoothing her eyebrow repeatedly. Aunt May's routine checkup had turned into an extended stay when her breathing had suddenly worsened during the examination. Now 2 hours later, Noelle was still waiting for updates. "Here." Lorenzo appeared at her side, holding a cup of her favorite cinnamon coffee. He'd rushed over as soon as she'd called, still in his work clothes, tool belt exchanged for a worried expression. "Thanks." She accepted the coffee, letting his steady presence anchor her. "I should have seen this coming." She was more tired than usual this morning, but she insisted on making pancakes, said she was fine. "Hey!" Lorenzo pulled her gently into his arms. "This isn't your fault. You can't predict everything." Before she could respond, Dr. Martinez emerged from the treatment area. "Ms. Parker, your aunt is stabilized now. The change in weather triggered an inflammatory response in her lungs, but we've adjusted her medication. She'll need to stay overnight for observation." Noelle felt her knees weaken with relief. Lorenzo's arm tightened supportively around her waist. "Can we see her?" he asked, the "we" warming something in Noelle's heart despite her worry. Inside the room they found Aunt May propped up in bed, her turban slightly askew but her spirit undimmed. "Well, if it isn't my favorite couple," she said, voice raspy but determined. "Don't look so worried, baby girl. Just needed to give these doctors something to do on a slow day." "Aunt May," Noelle started, but tears choked off her words. "Now none of that." Aunt May reached for her hand. "The Lord ain't finished with me yet. Besides," she winked at Lorenzo, "I've got to stick around to see where this love story goes." Lorenzo moved to adjust her pillows with practiced care. "You know we're not going anywhere, right? Whatever you need, whenever you need it." "I know, sweet boy." Aunt May patted his hand. "That's why I can rest easy. My Noelle's got good backup now." Later that evening, after making sure Aunt May was comfortable for the night, Noelle and Lorenzo walked through the hospital corridors, hand in hand. The rain continued outside, creating a rhythmic backdrop to their footsteps. "You should go home," Noelle said softly. "You've got that big network upgrade tomorrow." "I'm where I need to be." Lorenzo stopped, turning to face her. "Unless, do you want me to go?" "No," she admitted, stepping closer to him. "I never want you to go, and that scares me sometimes. How much I've come to depend on you, how natural it feels to have you here." "Why does that scare you?" "Because," Noelle smoothed her eyebrow, gathering thoughts. "Because what if something happens? To Aunt May, to us, to any of this. I've always been the one holding everything together, and now you're not doing it alone," Lorenzo finished gently. "That's not weakness, Noelle, it's love." She looked up at him, seeing the certainty in his blue-gray eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "Must be all those legal terms you keep teaching." "Me?" His smile softened. "Come here." She melted into his embrace, letting out a shaky breath against his chest. They stood like that for a long moment, the hospital's muted sounds fading around them. "You know what I think?" Lorenzo said finally, his voice rumbling under her ear. "I think you're still holding everything together. You're just letting me hold you while you do it." The truth of his words struck deep. Noelle tilted her face up to his, and their lips met in a kiss that tasted of coffee and understanding. When they parted, Lorenzo touched her cheek gently. "Let me take care of dinner tonight," he said. "I'll grab some food, meet you at your place. You can study while I set up a new humidifier in Aunt May's room. The weather report says this rain's staying for a while. You don't have to." "I want to." He kissed her forehead. "Partners, remember?" That word, partners, echoed in Noelle's mind as she drove home through the rain. 2 months into their relationship, and already Lorenzo had become essential to her world, not by taking over or trying to fix everything, but by standing beside her, supporting her dreams while sharing his own. At home, she changed into comfortable clothes and spread her law books across the kitchen table. Minutes later, Lorenzo arrived with bags of Thai food and a new humidifier. They fell into an easy rhythm, him setting up the equipment while she studied, occasionally reading interesting legal points aloud, or asking his opinion on case scenarios. So, in this case, she explained between bites of pad thai, the question is whether the property easement extends to new technology installations. Sounds relevant to my work, actually, Lorenzo said, adjusting the humidifier's settings. Last week we had to negotiate access rights for fiber optic cables through an old building's infrastructure. Really? Noelle sat up straighter. That could make a great example for my property law paper. They spent the next hour discussing the intersection of technology and property rights, their different professional perspectives creating insights neither would have reached alone. When Noelle finally looked at the clock, she was surprised to find she'd covered more material than she'd expected. See? Lorenzo smiled, noticing her expression. Sometimes support means just being here while you do your thing. How do you always know exactly what I need? She moved to wrap her arms around him from behind as he finished programming the humidifier. Because I pay attention. He turned in her embrace. To every word, every worry, every dream. You're worth paying. Attention to Noelle Parker. The rain drummed against the windows as they held each other in the quiet kitchen. Noelle breathed in his familiar scent, clean soap and subtle cologne and something uniquely Lorenzo, and felt her earlier fears settling into perspective. I love you, she whispered against his chest. Not falling in love anymore, but the certainty of love itself. Lorenzo's arms tightened around her. I love you too, all of you. The brilliant law student, the devoted niece, the woman who remembers how I take my coffee and argues property law with me at midnight. Later, after Lorenzo had left with promises to check on Aunt May before his morning installation, Noelle opened her notebook. She wrote, Love isn't just about the sunny days and garden dates. It's about holding hands in hospital corridors, about understanding silences and midnight worries. It's about finding someone who doesn't try to lift your world off your shoulders, but instead strengthens your stance so you can carry it better. Someone who knows that support sometimes means moving mountains, and sometimes just means being there while you move them yourself. She closed the notebook and went to check the key. Humidifier one last time. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lorenzo. Got home safe. Try to get some sleep. I'll bring breakfast to the hospital in the morning. We'll face whatever comes together. Reading his words, Noelle felt the last of her fear walls crumbling, because that's what real love was. Not the absence of storms, but the certainty of having someone to weather them with you. The email arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning while Noelle was opening the jewelry store. She nearly dropped her phone when she saw the sender. Preston, White & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. They were offering her a paid internship for the upcoming semester, a rare opportunity that could set her entire career trajectory. Her hands trembled as she read the details. The position would provide invaluable experience, networking opportunities, and a significant stipend that could help with Aunt May's medical bills. It was everything she'd dreamed of. Except for one detail. It would require her to relocate to the firm's office in another city, 3 hours away. Noelle smoothed her eyebrow, mind racing. She could drive back on weekends, hire a part-time caregiver for Aunt May during the week. The monitors Lorenzo had installed would help track things remotely. It would be hard but manageable, and this opportunity... The store's bell chimed. Lorenzo walked in, carrying her morning coffee and wearing a broad smile. Guess who just landed a major contract? He set the coffee down, his blue-gray eyes bright with excitement. CityNet's expanding their coverage to underserved neighborhoods, and they want me to head the entire infrastructure project. Lorenzo, that's amazing. Noelle moved around the counter to hug him, momentarily pushing aside her own news. It's a huge opportunity, he continued, holding her close. Better position, better pay, chance to make a real difference in the community. And, his voice softened, it means I can finally start thinking about our future. Together. Noelle's heart clenched. She pulled back slightly, smoothing her eyebrow again. What's wrong? Lorenzo's expression shifted to concern. You're doing the eyebrow thing. She swallowed hard. I just got an offer too, an internship with Preston, White & Associates. That's fantastic. Then, noting her continued tension, "Isn't it? It's in River Grove, 3 hours away." The silence that followed felt heavier than any they'd shared before. Lorenzo's hands dropped to his sides as he processed the information. "For how long?" he finally asked. 6 months, maybe longer if they offer a permanent position afterward." Noelle moved back behind the counter, needing the physical barrier to think clearly. "It's an incredible opportunity, the kind that could set up my whole career." "Of course it is." Lorenzo's voice was carefully neutral. "You deserve incredible opportunities. I haven't accepted yet. I need to think about Aunt May, about—" She met his eyes. "About us." "Don't." He stepped forward, placing his hands on the counter. "Don't let us be the reason you hold back. This is your dream. But what about your project here? What about everything we've built? We'll figure it out." But his hand went to his nape, betraying his uncertainty. 3 hours isn't that far. We can visit on weekends, call every day." The store's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. By the time Noelle finished with the customer inquiry, Lorenzo had been called away to an emergency network issue. "We'll talk more later," he promised, kissing her quickly before leaving. But something felt unfinished, unsettled. That evening, Noelle found Aunt May in her favorite armchair, surrounded by the soft hum of monitoring equipment. Her aunt took one look at her face and patted the ottoman beside her. "All right, baby girl, tell me what's troubling that heart of yours." Noelle explained the situation, her words tumbling out in a confused rush. When she finished, Aunt May adjusted her turban thoughtfully. "Sounds like you've got yourself a crossroads moment." "What should I do, Aunt May?" "Now you know I can't answer that for you." Her aunt's voice was gentle but firm. "But I can tell you this. Sometimes life's biggest choices aren't about right or wrong. They're about what story you want your heart to tell. But what about you? Your health is not your burden to carry alone." Aunt May reached for her hand. "Lorenzo's monitors work just fine from a distance, and I've got my whole church family looking out for me. Don't you dare use me as an excuse to hide from your destiny." "And Lorenzo?" Noelle whispered. "What? If distance changes everything?" "That boy?" Aunt May laughed softly. "He looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. Distance might change your schedule, but it won't change that kind of love." Later that night, unable to sleep, Noelle drove to their spot, the botanical gardens where they'd had their first date. Using the access code Lorenzo had given her, she made her way to the glass-enclosed courtyard. The night-blooming flowers were open, their fragrance filling the air with memories. She didn't hear him approach, but somehow wasn't surprised when Lorenzo's arms wrapped around her from behind. "I had a feeling I'd find you here," he murmured against her hair. "How did you know?" "Because I know you." He turned her gently to face him. "Just like I know you've been torturing yourself trying to make an impossible choice perfect." "I don't want to lose this," Noelle admitted, touching his face. "Lose us." "Hey." Lorenzo caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You're not losing anything. You're gaining an opportunity to shine even brighter, and I'll be right here, cheering you on from whatever distance necessary. But your project, your promotion, will still be here. The communities we're connecting aren't going anywhere." His eyes held hers steadily. "Noelle, love isn't about keeping each other small. It's about supporting each other's growth, even when it's scary. Even if it means only seeing each other on weekends. Even if it means video calls and text messages and missing you like crazy." He smiled softly. "I'd rather have you from a distance chasing your dreams than have you close and wondering what if." Tears spilled down Noelle's cheeks. "When did you get so wise? Must be all those property law discussions." He wiped her tears gently. "Take the internship. Show them how brilliant you are. I'll be here, making sure Aunt May's monitors are working perfectly and counting the days, until I can hold you again." "I love you," Noelle whispered against his lips. "So much it terrifies me sometimes." Good kind of terror, though, right? Lorenzo kissed her deeply, as if memorizing the feeling. Like standing on the edge of something magnificent. They stayed in the garden until dawn began to paint the sky, talking about logistics and plans, sharing fears and hopes, holding each other through the uncertainty. When Noelle finally opened her notebook that morning, she wrote, "Love isn't always about choosing between heart and dreams. Sometimes it's about finding someone who makes room for both, who understands that growth requires space and trust requires freedom. Someone who knows that true love isn't about holding tight, but about holding steady, steady enough to let each other fly." Her phone buzzed with a message from Lorenzo, "Just reminding you that you're amazing and that 3 hours is nothing compared to forever. Go shine, beautiful. I'll be here, loving you and fixing things until you come home." Reading his words, Noelle felt a new kind of certainty settling in her heart. Because sometimes the biggest leap of faith isn't in leaving or staying. It's in believing that real love grows stronger through every challenge, every distance, every change. 6 months could feel like an eternity or the blink of an eye. For Noelle, standing in the familiar warmth of Hendrik's fine jewelry on a bright spring morning, it felt like both. The store hadn't changed. Same gleaming cases, same soft lighting, same gentle hum of the air conditioning. But she had. Her internship at Preston White & Associates had ended yesterday, culminating in a job offer that had exceeded her wildest expectations. Now, back in the city where her heart had stayed, she found herself drawn to where everything began. Mrs. Hendricks had welcomed her with open arms and knowing eyes. "He still comes in, you know," she said while sorting through new inventory. "Every week, like clockwork. Always finds some reason to check the security systems or adjust the lighting." Noelle smiled, touching the delicate lotus pendant around her neck, Lorenzo's gift before she'd left for River Grove. Despite the distance, despite the challenges, they'd kept their promise. Video calls, weekend visits, endless text messages. They'd built their love stronger through the separation, learning to hear the words hidden in silences and to find comfort in digital connections. The bell chimed. "Speaking of," Mrs. Hendricks winked, disappearing into the back room. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, silhouetted by morning light. He looked the same, yet somehow more confident, more settled, more utterly essential to her world. His blue-grey eyes found hers immediately, and 6 months of distance vanished in a heartbeat. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," she echoed, moving around the counter toward him. They met in the middle of the store, where they'd first talked about sisters' gifts and loose clasps. His arms wrapped around her, and Noelle breathed in his familiar scent, clean soap, subtle cologne, and pure Lorenzo. "Welcome home," he murmured against her hair. "I got the job offer," she said into his chest. "Full position, incredible. Benefits, career fast track." Lorenzo pulled back slightly to see her face. "That's amazing. I'm so proud of—" He paused, noting something in her expression. "What aren't you telling me?" Noelle smoothed her eyebrow, a gesture that now made him smile with recognition. "They want me to work in their main office in River Grove." The silence that followed held 6 months of longing, of growth, of choices yet to be made. Lorenzo's hands remained steady on her waist, his eyes never leaving hers. "Before you say anything," Noelle continued quickly, "I need to show you something." She reached into her bag, pulling out a folder similar to the one he'd brought her months ago with medical support programs. Inside were housing listings, network infrastructure plans, and a proposal for a new tech initiative in River Grove's underserved communities. The firm has connections with major tech companies looking to expand their community outreach, she explained. They need someone who understands both the technical and legal aspects, someone who's proven they can manage large-scale infrastructure projects while maintaining community focus. Understanding dawned in Lorenzo's eyes. "Someone like me. The position would be perfect for you. Better pay, bigger impact, chance to make real change." Noelle touched his face gently. "But only if it's what you want. I've also got listings for places here, and the firm's local office has an opening. We can make it work either way." Lorenzo caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, an echo of that night in the garden when they'd faced their first real challenge. "You did all this research? Made all these plans?" "I learned from the best," she smiled. "From someone who taught me that love means making room for both dreams and reality." Instead of answering immediately, Lorenzo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Noelle's breath caught. "I was going to do this differently," he said, softly. "Had this whole plan involving the botanical gardens and night-blooming flowers. But standing here, where everything started, where I first fell in love with your smile and your strength." He sank to one knee. "This feels right." Tears blurred Noelle's vision as he opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the morning. Light like hope made tangible. "Noelle Parker," Lorenzo's voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "These past 6 months taught me something important. They taught me that distance can't diminish real love. It just proves how unshakable it is. Every video call, every weekend visit, every text message only made me more certain that you're the one I want to build a life with. Whether that life is here or in River Grove or somewhere else entirely doesn't matter, as long as we're building it together." He took her hand, his touch as gentle as always. "So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner in all things? Your support through every challenge, your—" "Yes," Noelle interrupted, dropping to her knees to join him on the floor. "Yes, to everything. To anywhere. To always." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, and their lips met in a kiss that tasted of joy and promise and forever. When they finally parted, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "River Grove," he said firmly. "Are you sure? Your work here can expand there. You're right about the opportunity, but more than that." He helped her to her feet, keeping her close. "I want to see you shine at full brightness. Besides," his smile turned playful, "someone needs to maintain all those environmental control systems in your fancy law firm." A commotion at the door made them both turn. Aunt May stood there resplendent in a turquoise turban, her breathing strong and steady thanks to months of proper treatment. Beside her, Deanna was trying and failing to look innocent. "Well?" Aunt May demanded. "Did my future nephew-in-law finally pop the question? You knew?" Noelle asked, laughing through happy tears. "Baby girl, who do you think helped him pick out the ring?" Aunt May moved forward to embrace them both. "And before you start worrying, I've already talked to my sister in River Grove. She's got a spare room and could use some company. Plus," she winked, "I hear they've got an excellent respiratory specialist there. You've all been planning this?" Noelle looked between them in amazement. "Love takes a village," Deanna said, joining their group hug, "especially when the people in love are as stupidly noble and self-sacrificing as you two." Later that evening, in the botanical garden courtyard where they'd shared so many moments, Noelle and Lorenzo sat surrounded by blooming flowers and twinkling lights. Their friends and family had insisted on an impromptu engagement celebration, but now, in the quiet aftermath, they had a moment just for them. "Happy?" Lorenzo asked, holding her close. "Complete," Noelle corrected, watching her ring catch the light. "Like everything that seemed complicated, finally makes perfect sense." Opening her notebook one last time, she wrote, "Love isn't a destination you reach or a problem you solve. It's a journey you choose to take together, a story you write day by day, moment by moment. It's finding someone who makes the hard choices easier, because they help you carry them. Someone who knows that life's greatest adventures aren't about the place you're going, but about who you're becoming together along the way." She closed the notebook and turned to kiss Lorenzo, her fiancé, her partner, her heart's greatest certainty. Above them, the stars emerged in the darkening sky, witnesses to a love that had grown like their night-blooming flowers, gradually, beautifully, and with perfect timing. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories aren't about dramatic gestures or grand sacrifices. Sometimes they're written in coffee cups and monitor installations, in hospital visits and law books, in the quiet ways two people choose each other every day. Sometimes they're told in the spaces between words, in the silence between heartbeats, in the smiles that say everything without saying anything at all. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they're just the beginning of an even greater adventure. 1 year later, the small garden behind their River Grove home bloomed with night flowers, their fragrance filling the evening air. Noelle sat on the porch swing, her old notebook in her lap, watching Lorenzo install motion sensor lights along the pathway. Some things never changed. He still fixed everything with the same careful attention, and she still found herself falling more in love with each passing day. "A little to the left," Aunt May called from her comfortable chair, her bright yellow turban matching the marigolds she'd insisted on planting among the evening primrose. Her breathing was stronger these days, thanks to the specialist who'd become more like family than doctor. "Perfect," Noelle agreed, smiling as her husband, that word still gave her butterflies, adjusted the light exactly as her aunt had suggested. Lorenzo joined them on the porch, automatically reaching for Noelle's hand. His wedding ring caught the light from his newest installation, and she remembered their simple ceremony in the botanical garden courtyard where they'd first admitted their love. Mrs. Hendricks had cried almost as much as Deanna, who'd served as both maid of honor and impromptu legal consultant for their vows. Their life wasn't perfect. They both worked long hours, she building her legal career while he expanded his community technology initiative. But it was perfectly theirs, built on quiet moments and steady love, on morning coffees and evening talks, on the understanding that grew deeper with each passing day. "Look what I found while unpacking that last box," Noelle said, showing Lorenzo her old notebook. "Remember what you wrote in it on our wedding day?" He smiled, reading his own words from the page. "To the woman who taught me that some connections don't need Wi-Fi. They just need patience, trust, and a little bit of technical support. You two are sweeter than my sweet potato pie," Aunt May declared, but her eyes were soft with joy. "Now who's going to help me hang these new wind chimes? I heard they're good for the garden's energy." As Lorenzo rose to help, giving Noelle a quick kiss, she opened to a fresh page in her notebook and wrote one final entry. "Some love stories don't end. They just keep beginning, every day, in all the small moments that make a life beautiful. In the way he still brings me coffee every morning. In how we've learned to hear I love you in comfortable silences. In the home we've built filled with night-blooming flowers and morning smiles. Because true love isn't about the big moments that change everything. It's about all the tiny moments that make everything worth changing for." She closed the notebook, joining her family in the garden they'd grown together, under stars that had witnessed their journey from the start. And if anyone asked, she would tell them that the best kinds of happily ever afters aren't endings at all. They're just beautiful new beginnings, blooming one quiet moment at a time. Tell us, if you had to choose between the love of your life and your dream job in another city, just like Noelle faced, what would your decision be? Do you believe it's possible to have both, or would you inevitably have to give up one for the other? Your participation in this channel means a lot to us. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time. She was hired to deliver a baby to a sterile widower, but couldn't leave after the birth. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She never thought her body would become her salvation, but desperate times call for desperate choices. Yanka Ellis adjusted her worn denim jacket as she stepped off the Greyhound bus in Napa Valley, the California sun hitting her dark skin with a warmth that felt foreign after months of traveling through colder states. Her canvas sneakers touched the pavement with the same cautious rhythm that had carried her through 27 years of life. Always ready to move, never ready to stay. The bus station smelled of diesel and stale coffee, nothing like the magnolia blossoms she remembered from Montgomery. She pulled one of her styled braids between her fingers, a nervous habit that betrayed the confidence she tried to project. The floral headscarf she'd chosen that morning, a small splash of color against her simple outfit, felt suddenly too bright, too hopeful for what lay ahead. Her phone buzzed. A text from the lawyer. "Mr. Moore will meet you at Riverside Diner on Main Street, 2 p.m. sharp." Yanka glanced at her cracked phone screen. 1:47 p.m. Just enough time to find the place and compose herself for the most unusual job interview of her life. The diner sat tucked between a vintage bookstore and a small pharmacy, its red vinyl booths visible through smudged windows. She pushed through the glass door, and a bell chimed overhead, the same sound that had followed her through countless similar establishments across the country. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't just passing through. She spotted him immediately. Cristiano Moore sat in the corner booth, his tall frame somehow making the space look smaller. Even seated, she could tell he was well over 6 feet. His grey eyes lifted from an untouched cup of coffee, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. He wasn't what she'd expected. No expensive suit, no flashy watch. Just a man in his late 30s wearing a simple button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked by honest work. His dark hair showed traces of silver at the temples, and his beard looked like he'd forgotten to shave for a few days. There was something deliberately unremarkable about his appearance, as if he'd chosen invisibility over impression. Miss Ellis. His voice carried no trace of California casualness, just measured formality. Mr. Moore. She slid into the booth across from him, noting how his fingers wrapped around the coffee mug without lifting it, like he needed something to hold on to. The waitress appeared, an older woman with kind eyes and sensible shoes. "What can I get you, honey?" "Just coffee, please." Yanka's Alabama accent emerged slightly thicker than usual, the way it always did when she felt uncertain. They sat in silence until the coffee arrived. Steam rose between them like a barrier neither seemed ready to cross. The lawyer explained the arrangement, Cristiano said finally, his eyes focused somewhere just past her shoulder. "But I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to." Yanka straightened. She'd had this conversation with herself 100 times during the 3-day bus ride. 9 months. Your baby, $50,000. Her voice stayed steady. Professional. "I understand perfectly." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or disappointment. "It's not that simple." "It is for me." She took a sip of coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. "I've done my research, Mr. Moore. I know the risks, the legal aspects, the medical requirements. This isn't my first rodeo with difficult decisions." He leaned back slightly, studying her with those unsettling grey eyes. "Why?" The question hung between them, more personal than anything they'd discussed through lawyers and paperwork. Yanka felt the familiar urge to deflect, to give him the sanitized version she'd prepared. Instead, she found herself being honest. "Because I'm tired of just surviving." The words came out quieter than she'd intended. "And because sometimes helping someone else get what they want is the only way to get what you need." Cristiano's hand moved to his jaw, fingers tracing the line of his beard, a gesture that seemed unconscious, vulnerable. "There's something else," he said, and the tone of his voice made her pulse quicken. "Something the lawyers didn't tell you." And in that moment, Yanka realized this arrangement was about to become far more complicated than any contract could contain. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Yanka's coffee cup trembled almost imperceptibly in her hands as she waited for Cristiano to continue. The diner's afternoon crowd buzzed around them, truckers ordering pie, a young mother wiping her toddler's face, an elderly couple sharing a basket of fries, but their corner booth felt isolated from the world. "The pregnancy will be high risk," Cristiano said finally, his grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Not because of anything wrong with you, but because of my genetic history. My son—" He paused, his jaw working silently before he found the words. "My son was born with complications that made his first months difficult." Yanka set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "What kind of complications?" "Heart defects. Respiratory issues. He spent more time in the NICU than at home." Cristiano's voice remained steady, but she noticed how his knuckles whitened as he gripped his mug. "The doctors said it was genetic, rare, but possible to pass on." The waitress refilled their cups without being asked, her practiced movements a welcome distraction from the weight settling between them. Yanka watched the steam rise from her fresh coffee, buying herself time to process what she'd just heard. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that I could be carrying a baby who might not make it, or who might be perfectly healthy?" Cristiano leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since she'd sat down, his composure cracked just enough to reveal something raw underneath. "The chances are about 30% that there could be issues. 70% that everything would be normal." Yanka felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the same feeling she'd had at 19 when the police officer told her about her parents' accident, or at 23 when her last landlord gave her 3 days to pack, the feeling of the ground shifting beneath her feet. "And you didn't think to mention this before I traveled 2,000 miles. I wanted to tell you in person." His voice dropped lower, more private. "This isn't just a business transaction for me, Miss Ellis. If something goes wrong—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Janka could hear the ending in the silence that followed. She studied his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the careful way he held himself as if bracing for impact. "You lost them," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Cristiano's hand moved to his jaw again, that unconscious gesture she was beginning to recognize. "I had a car accident when my son was 2. My wife was driving to pick up his medication." The words came out measured, like he'd practiced saying them without falling apart. They were my whole world. The confession hung between them, heavy and honest. Janka understood now why he'd sought out this arrangement, why he was willing to pay $50,000 to a stranger. It wasn't about wanting a child, it was about needing to fill a void that had swallowed everything else. She thought about the bus ticket in her backpack, about the $300 left in her worn wallet, about the endless succession of small towns and temporary jobs that had defined her adult life. She thought about her parents, gone 8 years now, and how desperately she'd wanted to build something permanent from the ashes of her loss. 70% odds, she repeated, more to herself than to him. "I understand if you want to walk away." Cristiano reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I brought enough cash to cover your bus fare back, plus extra for your time." Janka stared at the envelope, then at his face. In his grey eyes she saw something she recognized, the particular kind of hope that came after too much grief, fragile and fierce at the same time. She made her decision before she could second-guess herself. "I'll need to meet the doctor first. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." She pushed the envelope back across the table. "And I'll need everything in writing, every detail, every risk, every contingency." Something shifted in Cristiano's expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. "Dr. Santos is the best high-risk specialist in Northern California," he said. "She handled my wife's pregnancy. She'll tell you everything you need to know." Janka nodded, feeling the familiar sensation of stepping off a cliff into uncertain air. But this time, for the first time in years, she wasn't jumping alone. Outside the diner window, the California sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of promise and warning, and neither of them knew that this conversation had just set in motion something that would change both their lives forever. Dr. Elena Maria Santos had the kind of hands that made patients feel safe before she even spoke a word. Janka noticed them first, steady, graceful fingers that moved with practiced confidence as she flipped through the medical charts. The doctor's office smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a combination that somehow managed to be both clinical and comforting. Diplomas lined the walls alongside family photos, showing a woman who clearly understood the value of both professional excellence and personal warmth. "Please, sit." Dr. Santos gestured to the chairs across from her mahogany desk, her voice carrying the slight musical accent of her Mexican heritage. At 44, she wore her authority lightly, dressed in earth-toned blouses that softened the sterile environment of the medical center. Janka settled into the chair, hyper-aware of Cristiano's presence beside her. He sat with the same controlled posture she'd observed at the diner, but she caught him glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking, quick, assessing glances that felt less like scrutiny and more like concern. "Mr. Moore has explained the situation," Dr. Santos began, her dark eyes moving between them with the kind of perceptive attention that missed nothing. "But I want to hear from you, Janka. What questions do you have?" The use of her first name felt deliberately intimate, a small bridge across the professional distance. Janka pulled gently at one of her braids, gathering her thoughts. "I need to know what high risk really means. Not the medical terminology, the truth about what I might be facing." Dr. Santos leaned back in her chair, a gesture that somehow made the room feel less formal. "I appreciate directness. It makes my job easier." She opened the top file on her desk. "Cristiano's genetic history indicates a 30% chance of cardiac and respiratory complications. If they occur, they typically manifest in the second trimester. And if they do manifest," Janka's voice stayed steady, but she felt Cristiano tense beside her. "Bed rest, frequent monitoring, possible hospitalization for the final months." "Doctor." Santos's tone remained matter-of-fact, but her eyes carried genuine warmth. The baby would likely be born premature and require extended NICU care, but Janka, she leaned forward slightly. 70% of pregnancies with this genetic marker result in completely healthy babies. Janka absorbed this information, filing away each detail. "What about me? What are the risks to my health? Higher blood pressure, increased chance of gestational diabetes, possible complications during delivery, all manageable with proper care." Dr. Santos's fingers drummed once against the desk. But there's something else we need to discuss. The room seemed to hold its breath. If complications do arise, if this becomes a high-maintenance pregnancy requiring extended bed rest and hospitalization, you'll need someone to advocate for you. Someone who understands your medical history, your preferences, your fears. She looked directly at Cristiano. The traditional surrogacy arrangement assumes distance between parties. This situation might require closeness. Janka felt heat rise in her cheeks. What kind of closeness? Living arrangements that allow for immediate medical response. 24-hour accessibility to both you and emergency care. In my experience with similar cases, Dr. Santos paused, choosing her words carefully. The most successful outcomes happen when the support system is consistent and present. Cristiano cleared his throat. I have a guest house on my property. It's private, comfortable, close enough for medical emergencies, far enough for personal space. The offer hung in the air like a question neither of them had expected to face so soon. Janka imagined herself in some remote guest house, dependent on a man she'd known for exactly one day, carrying a child who might or might not survive. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. Dr. Santos reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. But Janka, I want you to know something. I've been handling high-risk pregnancies for 15 years. I've seen arrangements like this work beautifully when both parties are committed to the process, and I've seen them fail when people try to maintain too much distance. She stood up, signaling the end of the consultation. The choice is yours, but if you decide to move forward, we'll need to begin prenatal vitamins and monitoring within the week. Outside the medical center, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Janka and Cristiano walked to his truck, an older Ford F-150 that looked well-maintained but unpretentious, exactly what she was beginning to expect from him. The guest house, she said, as they reached the vehicle. What's it like? Cristiano's hand paused on the door handle. One bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom with a garden tub, windows facing the vineyard. It's quiet. After 8 years of bus stations, highway motels and shared apartments with strangers, quiet sounded like a foreign concept. Can I see it? The words came out before she could stop them. He nodded, and something in his expression shifted. A wall coming down, or maybe a door opening just a crack. As they drove toward his property, Janka stared out the window at the rolling hills of Napa Valley and wondered if she was about to make the smartest decision of her life, or the most dangerous one she'd ever risked. The vineyard stretched out like a green ocean under the golden hour light, and Janka felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in months. Cristiano's property was nothing like she'd imagined. No ostentatious mansion or manicured gardens screaming wealth. Instead, she saw weathered wooden fences, gravel pathways worn smooth by years of use, and a main house that looked like it had grown organically from the landscape itself. The guest house sat about 50 yards away, a small, cottage-like structure with white-painted wood siding and a wraparound porch that begged for a rocking chair. It's not much, Cristiano said, as he cut the truck's engine, but his voice carried a note of pride he was trying to hide. Janka stepped out of the cab, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. The air smelled different here, clean with hints of earth and growing things that reminded her vaguely of her grandmother's backyard in Montgomery, a place where she'd felt safe once upon a time. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. The guest house key turned easily in the lock, and the front door opened to reveal exactly what Cristiano had promised. One bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom with a garden tub. But he'd undersold the charm. Hardwood floors worn to a warm honey color, windows that let in streams of late afternoon light, and a kitchen table just big enough for 2 people who might want to share a quiet meal. The previous owners built it for their daughter when she got married, Cristiano explained, lingering in the doorway, as if uncertain whether he should follow her inside. She wanted to stay close to family, but have her own space. Janka ran her fingers along the kitchen counter. Real wood, not laminate. In the bedroom, she found a queen-sized bed with a quilt that looked handmade and windows that framed the vineyard like living paintings. How long since anyone lived here? She asked. 3 years. He paused. Since before my wife and son died. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. This wasn't just a guest house. It was a place where he'd once imagined hosting family, friends, celebrations. Now it sat empty, another casualty of his grief. Janka turned to face him. Why are you doing this? Really? Cristiano looked out the bedroom window toward the vineyard, his jaw working silently before he answered, "Because I'm tired of everything here being about loss." His voice came out rougher than usual. "I want something to grow again." The honesty in his words hit her unexpectedly hard. She thought about the bus ticket in her backpack, about the motel room she'd paid for in town, about the countless temporary places she'd called home over the past 8 years. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Name them. I keep my own schedule, my own routines. If I want to take the bus to town for groceries or just to think, I do it without checking in." She counted off on her fingers. No hovering, no treating me like I'm made of glass, and no assumptions about what this arrangement means beyond the contract. Cristiano nodded. "Anything else? If this gets complicated, if you start looking at me like I'm her replacement, or if I start feeling like a prisoner in paradise, we call it off. No questions, no guilt trips." "Fair enough." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and held them out. "House key, spare truck key in case of emergencies, and—" He hesitated. "The main house key, just in case." Their fingers brushed as she took the keys, and for a moment neither of them moved. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. "I'll need a few days to think it over," she said, stepping back. "Of course." But something in his expression suggested he already knew what her answer would be. As the sun began to set, they stood on the guest house porch, the vineyard spread out before them like a promise. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the sound carried across the fields with rural ease. "What's that?" Janka pointed to a small building near the main house. "Old wine cellar. I converted it into a workshop." Cristiano's hands found his pockets. "I restore furniture in my spare time. Keeps my hands busy." She could picture him there, sleeves rolled up, focused on bringing something broken back to life. The image felt unexpectedly intimate, like she was glimpsing something private. "I should get back to town," she said, though something in her was reluctant to leave. "I'll drive you." "I can walk. It's only a couple miles." "Not in the dark." His tone brooked no argument. "Besides, I need to pick up groceries anyway." As they drove back toward town, the silence between them felt different, less guarded, more thoughtful. When they reached the motel, Cristiano parked but didn't turn off the engine. "Janka," he said as she reached for the door handle. She turned back to him. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know, this isn't about replacing what I lost. It's about building something new." She studied his face in the dashboard light, seeing something there she hadn't noticed before. Vulnerability wrapped in determination. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. But as she walked toward her motel room, Janka already knew that tomorrow would bring a decision that would change everything. Because for the first time in 8 years, she'd found a place that felt like it might become home. 3 days later, Janka stood in the guest house doorway with everything she owned fitting into 2 duffel bags and a worn backpack. It wasn't much. Clothes that had survived countless laundromats, a few books with dog-eared pages, the small sewing kit her mother had given her, and a mason jar filled with buttons she'd collected from every city she'd passed through. 8 years of nomadic life distilled into what she could carry. "That's it?" Cristiano asked, setting down the bags he'd insisted on carrying from his truck. "I travel light." She tried to keep her voice casual, but something about the way he looked at her meager possessions made her feel exposed. "Less to lose that way." He nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his grey eyes. "I put some basics in the kitchen. Coffee, bread, eggs. There's a grocery store in town, but if you need anything specific, I can take care of myself." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, a defensive reflex honed by years of independence. "I know you can." His response was gentle, without judgment. "I just meant, you don't have to." The distinction hit her unexpectedly. There was a difference between being able to take care of yourself and having to do it alone. She wasn't sure she remembered how to navigate that difference. "Dr. Santos wants to see me next week," she said, changing the subject. "Start the monitoring." "I'll drive you." "I can." "Janka." He said her name quietly, and something in his tone made her look at him. "Let me help. It's what I'm here for." She wanted to argue, to maintain the walls that had kept her safe for so long. Instead, she found herself nodding. After Cristiano left, she unpacked in silence, placing her few belongings in drawers that felt cavernous compared to the motel rooms and shared spaces she was used to. The closet could hold 10 times her wardrobe. The bathroom had counter space for toiletries she didn't own. That evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and one of her books, A soft knock interrupted the quiet. Through the window, she could see Cristiano on the porch, holding a plate covered with a kitchen towel. "I made too much dinner," he said when she opened the door. "Thought you might be hungry." The plate held perfectly grilled chicken, roasted vegetables that looked like they'd come from his own garden, and rice with herbs she couldn't identify. It smelled like comfort, like the kind of meal someone makes when they actually care about nourishment, rather than just filling an empty stomach. "You didn't have to—" "I know." He handed her the plate, their fingers brushing again. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. "But I wanted to." After he left, Janka ate slowly, savoring each bite. The vegetables were sweet and tender, the chicken seasoned with something that reminded her of her grandmother's Sunday dinners. When she finished, she found herself staring at the empty plate, wondering when was the last time someone had cooked for her, just because they wanted to take care of her. The next morning, she woke to find a thermos of coffee on the porch steps, still warm, with a note, "In case you like it stronger than what's in the kitchen." The coffee was perfect, dark and rich, exactly how she preferred it. He'd been paying attention during their brief conversations, filing away details she hadn't even realized she'd shared. That afternoon, she ventured to the main house to return the dinner plate. Through the kitchen window, she could see Cristiano at the stove, sleeves rolled up, moving with the easy confidence of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. He looked different here, less guarded, more himself. "Thank you for dinner," she said when he answered her knock. "There's leftover lasagna if you want some." He gestured toward the kitchen. "I'm not good at cooking for one person anymore." The admission was quietly devastating. She could picture him in this kitchen with his wife, probably laughing while they prepared meals together, maybe with their son in a high chair making a mess with his food. Now he cooked elaborate meals for no one, muscle memory of a life that no longer existed. "I could help," she found herself saying. "With the cooking, I mean, if you want." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe gratitude. "You don't have to." "I know," she echoed his words from the night before. "But I want to." That evening, they cooked together in comfortable silence. Janka chopped vegetables while Cristiano seasoned the meat, their movements gradually synchronizing as they shared the small kitchen space. When her hand reached for the salt at the same time as his, when he stepped behind her to reach the upper cabinet, when she passed him ingredients without being asked, each small interaction felt like a dance they were learning together. "You're good at this," he said, watching her julienne carrots with practiced precision. "My grandmother taught me. Said a woman should know how to feed herself and the people she loves." The words slipped out before she could catch them, carrying more weight than she'd intended. "She sounds wise." She was. Janka focused on the carrots, not trusting herself to look at him. "She died when I was 16. Cancer. I'm sorry." The simple words carried genuine sympathy, not the empty platitudes she was used to hearing. He understood loss, understood the way it carved holes in your life that never quite filled in. As they sat down to eat, Janka realized this was the first time in years she'd shared a meal that felt like more than just consuming calories. The food tasted better when eaten across from someone who noticed whether you preferred your vegetables crisp or tender, who refilled your water glass without being asked, who seemed genuinely interested in the small stories you found yourself telling between bites. "This is nice," she said softly, then immediately regretted the admission. "It is," Cristiano agreed, his voice equally quiet. Outside the kitchen window, the vineyard stretched into darkness, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the evening sounds of the countryside, crickets, the rustle of wind through grapevines, the settled breathing of land at rest. For the first time since her parents died, Janka felt something that might have been peace, but peace, she'd learned, was the most dangerous emotion of all, because it made you want to stay. 2 weeks into the pregnancy, Janka woke up at 3 in the morning with her heart racing and her hands trembling. The nausea had started gradually, a queasy feeling that crept in during the afternoon, making her push away half-finished meals. But this was different. This felt like her body was staging a revolution, and she was losing the war. She stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the cool porcelain of the sink, as waves of dizziness washed over her. In the mirror, her reflection looked pale against her dark skin, and the braids she'd been too tired to properly wrap the night before fell in loose tendrils around her face. "Come on," she whispered to herself, the Alabama accent thicker in her exhaustion. "You've handled worse than this." But as another wave of nausea hit, she wasn't so sure. A soft knock on the guest house door made her freeze. Through the window, she could see Cristiano's silhouette on the porch, and she realized she'd left the bathroom light on, a beacon in the pre-dawn darkness that had probably woken him. "Janka, are you okay?" She wanted to call out that she was fine, that he should go back to bed, that she didn't need anyone hovering over her. Instead, she found herself opening the door, grateful for the cool night air on her clammy skin. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but the words came out shaky. Cristiano took one look at her and stepped inside without asking permission. "You're not fine. When did this start?" "Few days ago." She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly too tired to maintain her usual walls. "It's just morning sickness, normal pregnancy stuff." "At 3 in the morning?" She managed a weak smile. "The baby doesn't know how to tell time yet." But Cristiano didn't smile back. He was studying her with the same intense focus she'd seen in Dr. Santos's office, cataloguing details with the precision of someone who'd learned to watch for warning signs. "Have you been eating?" he asked. "Some." The truth was, everything had started tasting wrong. Even her morning coffee, the one bright spot in her daily routine, now made her stomach revolt. Without a word, Cristiano moved to her kitchen, opening cabinets with the easy familiarity of someone who'd stocked them himself. He pulled out crackers, ginger tea, and honey, moving with quiet efficiency as he prepared something that smelled soothing rather than overwhelming. "My wife had terrible morning sickness," he said, his back to her as he worked. "Dr. Santos said ginger tea and small, frequent meals. Nothing too strong, nothing too sweet." Janka watched his hands as he prepared the tea. Steady, careful, practiced. "Did it help?" "Sometimes." He turned to face her, and for a moment, the careful distance he usually maintained slipped away. She used to joke that the baby was already making demands like a typical Moor. The past tense hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to cross. Janka found herself wanting to ask more about his wife, about the pregnancy, about what it felt like to lose everything you'd built your life around. Instead, she accepted the mug of tea he offered, inhaling the gentle steam. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me for taking care of you." The words came out more intense than he'd probably intended, and she saw him catch himself, stepping back both physically and emotionally. "I mean, it's part of the arrangement." But they both knew it wasn't just about the arrangement anymore. The tea helped, warm and settling in her stomach. As the nausea receded, Janka became aware of other things, how Cristiano had thrown on jeans and a t-shirt over what were obviously sleep clothes, how his hair stuck up on one side, how he kept glancing at her with barely concealed worry. "You didn't have to get up," she said. "I could have handled this alone." "I know you could have." He sat down across from her at the small table. "But you don't have to anymore." There was that phrase again. The distinction between could and had to. It was becoming a theme between them. This careful negotiation of independence and care. "The light woke you up?" "No." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't sleep much anyway. I was reading in the kitchen when I saw your light come on." Insomnia. Another casualty of grief, she supposed. She imagined him sitting alone in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, probably drinking coffee that was too strong and reading books that couldn't quite distract him from the quiet of a house meant for a family. "What do you read?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise him. Mostly non-fiction, farming journals, winemaking techniques, sometimes biography. He paused. "What about you?" "Fiction, usually. Romance novels, mostly." She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the admission. People always act like they're trash, but they're not. They're about hope, about believing that two broken people can fix each other. Something flickered across his face. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "I don't think they're trash," he said quietly. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, dawn creeping across the vineyard in shades of purple and gold. Janka realized they'd been sitting here for nearly an hour, talking in the soft voices of people who'd found themselves unexpectedly comfortable with each other. "I should let you get some sleep," Cristiano said, standing. "Will you?" she asked. "Sleep, I mean." He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "Probably not. But that's not your problem to solve." "Maybe not," she said. "But I'm awake too if you want company." The offer hung between them, more intimate than either of them had intended. Cristiano looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing the wisdom of accepting against the loneliness of declining. "I make good coffee," he said finally. "Even if you can't drink it right now. I'll stick with the tea, but I'd like the company." As they walked together toward the main house in the early morning light, Janka realized something had shifted between them. The careful boundaries they'd established were beginning to blur, replaced by something more honest and infinitely more dangerous. Because caring for someone, really caring, was the first step toward loving them, and love had never been part of their contract. Your blood pressure is elevated, and you've lost 3 pounds since last week. Dr. Santos's words hung in the examination room like a diagnosis neither Janka nor Cristiano wanted to hear. The ultrasound machine hummed softly in the corner, and Janka could still feel the cool gel on her belly from the scan that had shown their baby, healthy, active, and completely unaware of the complications brewing around it. What does that mean? Janka asked, adjusting the paper gown that never seemed to cover enough. It means we need to take this more seriously. Dr. Santos pulled her chair closer, her earth-toned cardigan a calming presence in the sterile room. The nausea, the weight loss, the elevated blood pressure, these aren't just normal pregnancy symptoms. Your body is struggling with the hormonal changes. Cristiano leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. What can we do? Bed rest. Modified, not complete, yet. But I want Janka to limit her activities, stay hydrated, and eat small meals every 2 hours whether she feels like it or not. Dr. Santos's dark eyes moved between them with the perceptive attention Janka was beginning to recognize. She'll need someone to monitor her, make sure she's following the restrictions. I can take care of myself, Janka said automatically, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. The past few days had been a struggle, dizziness when she stood too quickly, exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones, nausea that made even water taste wrong. I know you can, Dr. Santos said gently. Joyce, but right now, taking care of yourself means accepting help. This isn't about weakness, Janka. This is about giving your baby the best chance. The word baby still felt strange on her tongue, still carried the clinical distance of fetus or pregnancy. But when Dr. Santos said it with warmth and certainty, it became something real, something that deserved protection. What about work? Janka asked. She'd been doing some freelance bookkeeping online, small jobs that helped her feel productive and independent. Light computer work is fine, but no stress, no deadlines that keep you up at night. Dr. Santos made notes in her chart. And I want to see you weekly now instead of bi-weekly. Outside the medical center, Cristiano was unusually quiet as they walked to his truck. The late morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the weight of what they'd just heard. You're worried, Janka said as they drove through downtown Napa. Aren't you? She was, but admitting it felt like giving up some essential part of herself, the part that had survived 8 years of uncertainty by refusing to depend on anyone else's strength. I'll be fine, she said. I just need to adjust my routine. Cristiano pulled into a pharmacy parking lot and turned off the engine. Janka, look at me. When she met his grey eyes, she saw something there that made her chest tighten. Not pity, but genuine concern, mixed with something deeper, more personal. You don't have to pretend this isn't scary, he said quietly. I'm scared too. The admission hit her unexpectedly hard. She'd been so focused on maintaining her own walls that she hadn't considered how this might be affecting him. Watching another pregnancy carry the same risks that had once threatened his wife and child. I keep thinking about what Dr. Santos said, she found herself saying, about accepting help. I don't know how to do that anymore. Maybe that's something we can figure out together. The word together hung between them, carrying more weight than a simple arrangement between strangers. They sat in the parking lot, watching people go about their ordinary lives, and Janka realized that somewhere in the past month, this had stopped being ordinary for either of them. That afternoon, Cristiano appeared at the guest house with bags of groceries and a determined expression. What's all this? Janka asked, watching him unload items onto her kitchen counter. Dr. Santos gave me a list. He held up a piece of paper covered in his careful handwriting. Try foods that might help with the nausea, things that are easy to digest, supplements you need to take. She watched him organize everything with methodical precision, crackers in one cabinet, herbal teas in another, fruits and vegetables that looked like they'd been chosen with scientific care. You don't have to... Janka. He turned to face her, and she saw that familiar gesture as his hand moved to his jaw. Let me do this. Please. There was something in his voice. Not quite desperation, but close to it. She realized this wasn't just about taking care of her. This was about him needing to feel useful, needed, protective. This was about him trying to save someone he couldn't save before. Okay, she said quietly. Relief flickered across his face. I can cook for both of us, bring meals over, or you could eat at the main house. Whatever feels comfortable. The main house, she heard herself say. If that's okay, it feels less like charity that way. Something warm crossed his expression. It's not charity, it's... He paused, searching for the right word. It's taking care of family. The word family settled between them like a question neither of them was ready to answer. But that evening, as Janka sat at Cristiano's kitchen table eating soup that tasted like comfort and watching him move around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, it didn't feel like pretending. It felt like something she'd been missing without knowing it. The baby moved today, she said suddenly, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. During the ultrasound, Dr. Santos said it was a good sign. Cristiano paused in his dishwashing, his shoulders tensing slightly. Could you feel it? Not yet, but I could see it on the screen. Just a little flutter. She looked down at her hands, made it seem more real somehow. When he turned to face her, his eyes held a mixture of joy and pain that made her heart ache for him. That's good, he said softly. Jas, that's really good. Later, as she walked back to the guest house under a sky full of stars, Janka realized that for the first time since her parents died, she wasn't just surviving. She was hoping, and hope, she was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous thing of all. The nightmares always came at 2:30 in the morning. Janka had been living at the guest house for 6 weeks now, and she'd learned to recognize the sounds from the main house. The sudden silence, where there should have been the gentle rhythm of sleep, followed by footsteps pacing across hardwood floors, then the soft closing of a door as Cristiano stepped onto his porch. Tonight, as she lay in bed feeling the baby's first tentative movements like butterfly wings against her ribs, she heard it again, the restless walking, the weight of grief moving through rooms that had once held laughter. She should stay in bed, mind her own business, respect the boundaries they'd carefully maintained, even as those boundaries grew thinner each day. Instead, she found herself pulling on her robe and walking across the dewy grass toward the main house. Cristiano sat on his porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring out at the vineyard. He'd thrown on jeans and a t-shirt, but his feet were bare, and his hair stuck up on one side like he'd been running his hands through it. In the moonlight, he looked younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "You're supposed to be resting," he said without looking up, as if he'd sensed her approach. "So are you." She settled beside him on the step, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not quite touching. "Is I a bad dream?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Car accident. Always the same one. I see it happening, but I can't stop it." Janka pulled her robe tighter around herself, feeling the night air carry the scent of grapevines and earth. "Do you want to talk about it?" Not particularly, but he didn't get up and go inside, didn't shut down the conversation the way she expected. "What about you? Why are you awake? Baby's moving more at night. It's strange, like having a secret only I know about." She placed her hand on her stomach, where a gentle flutter responded to her touch. "Sometimes I forget this is temporary, that in a few months I'll hand this baby over and go back to my regular life. Will you?" The question came out quiet, almost hesitant. "That's the arrangement. I know what the arrangement says." Cristiano turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his grey eyes seemed almost silver. "But what do you want?" The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. What did she want? For 8 years, wanting had been a luxury she couldn't afford. Wanting meant hoping, and hoping meant disappointment, and disappointment meant the kind of pain that could knock you flat for months. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've spent so long not letting myself want things that I've forgotten how. I remember what that's like." His voice carried the weight of experience. "After the accident, I stopped wanting anything except for the pain to stop. It was safer that way." "What changed?" He looked out at the vineyard, where moonlight painted the grapevines silver. "You did. This did." He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. "Suddenly, I was invested in something again, and it terrified me." The admission hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it voiced something she'd been feeling but couldn't name. This growing sense that what was happening between them was bigger than a business arrangement, more complicated than simple proximity. "Cristiano," she started, then stopped, not sure how to finish. "I know," he said quietly. "I know this wasn't supposed to happen. I know we agreed to keep things professional, but somewhere along the way, professional became personal, and personal became dangerous," she finished. "Yeah." They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken feelings settling around them like fog. In the distance, An owl called, and somewhere in the vineyard, small creatures rustled through the leaves, carrying on with their lives, while two humans tried to figure out how theirs had become so tangled together. "I think about you all the time," Cristiano said suddenly, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them back for weeks. "How you pull on your braids when you're thinking, how you hum while you cook, how you get that line between your eyebrows when you're trying not to let me see that you need help." Yanka felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Cristiano, I think about what it would be like if this were real, if you were staying because you wanted to, not because Dr. Santos said you had to. If this baby were ours, not just mine." The word ours hung in the air between them, carrying all the weight of possibilities they'd both been trying not to acknowledge. "But it's not real," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and wanting it to be real is just going to hurt both of us. I know that." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. "Ty, but I can't seem to stop myself from wanting it anyway." Without thinking, she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both natural and earth-shattering. His skin was warm, calloused from work, and she could feel his pulse beating against her thumb. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I've been alone for so long that I don't know how to be part of something. And this baby, what happens when the baby comes? What happens to us? I don't know." He squeezed her hand gently. "But maybe we don't have to figure it all out tonight." "Maybe not," she agreed. They sat holding hands in the moonlight, two people who'd found each other in the space between grief and hope, contract and connection. The baby moved again, a stronger flutter this time, and Yanka gasped softly. "What?" Cristiano asked, concern immediately replacing the softness in his voice. "The baby. It's here." She guided his free hand to her stomach, pressing his palm against the spot where she'd felt the movement. They waited, barely breathing, and then it happened again, a gentle push against his hand, like the baby was saying hello. Cristiano's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. That's incredible." "The first time you've felt it move," Yanka said softly. "The first time anyone has," he corrected. "You're the only one who's been there for all of this." The weight of that truth settled between them. She was the one who'd been there for the morning sickness, the doctor's appointments, the midnight worries. She was the one carrying this piece of his heart, literally and figuratively. "I should go back to bed," she said, but neither of them moved. "Probably." But his hand stayed on her stomach, and hers stayed in his. "Now this is going to complicate everything," she whispered. "Everything's already complicated," he said, "but maybe that's not such a bad thing." As they finally stood to go their separate ways, Yanka realized that tonight had changed something fundamental between them. They'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross, acknowledged feelings they couldn't take back. And as she walked back to the guest house with the memory of his hand on her stomach and the warmth of his confession still echoing in her ears, she knew that whatever happened next, she was no longer just carrying his baby, she was carrying his heart. And somehow he'd ended up with hers. The contractions started at 4 in the morning, sharp and unmistakable, 12 weeks before they were supposed to. Yanka woke with a gasp that turned into a cry of pain, her hands instinctively moving to her 28-week belly as her body cramped with frightening intensity. This wasn't the gentle Braxton Hicks contractions Dr. Santos had warned her about. This was something else entirely. "No, no, no," she whispered to the empty guest house, panic rising in her throat as another contraction gripped her. "Not yet. Please, not yet." Through the haze of pain and fear, she managed to reach for her phone, fingers shaking as she scrolled to Cristiano's number. The phone rang once before his voice answered, instantly alert despite the early hour. "Yanka, what's wrong?" "Something's happening," she managed between contractions. "The baby, I think—" She didn't need to finish. Through the window, she could see lights flicking on in the main house, and within minutes, Cristiano was at her door, still pulling on a shirt over his jeans, his hair disheveled, but his eyes sharp with focus. "How far apart?" he asked, moving to her side with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been through this before. "Every 3 minutes," she gasped. "Cristiano, it's too early. The baby can't come now. We're going to the hospital." His voice stayed steady, but she could see the fear in his grey eyes, the memory of another emergency that had ended in loss. "Can you walk?" The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of pain and sirens. Cristiano had called 911, and the paramedics met them halfway, transferring Yanka to the ambulance while he followed behind. She kept her eyes fixed on his truck in the side mirror, drawing strength from his presence even as terror threatened to overwhelm her. "We need to stop this," she heard Dr. Santos saying as they wheeled her into the emergency room. "Get her on magnesium sulfate, start an IV, and call the NICU team." The next hours passed in a haze of medical procedures and mounting fear. Yanka found herself in a hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped with the baby's heartbeat, strong but too fast, distressed by whatever was happening in her body. "The medication is helping," Dr. Santos explained, her usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. "We've slowed the contractions, but not stopped them completely. You're not dilating, which is good, but the baby is showing signs of stress." "What does that mean?" Cristiano asked from the chair beside her bed. He'd been there since they arrived, holding her hand through each contraction, his presence the only thing keeping her anchored to hope. "It means we wait, and we watch, very carefully." Dr. Santos checked the monitors again. "Yanka, you're going to be here for a while. Strict bed rest, constant monitoring. If the contractions stop and stay stopped for 48 hours, we can consider sending you home. But if they continue..." She didn't need to finish. If they continued, the baby would come too early, too small, too fragile, just like Cristiano's son had. "I want to stay," Cristiano said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just during visiting hours. I want to be here." Dr. Santos looked between them with her perceptive eyes, seeing something that went deeper than their original arrangement. "Are you the father?" The question hung in the room like a challenge. Legally, biologically, yes, Cristiano was the father. But the way Dr. Santos asked it, the way she looked at them holding hands with Yanka's head on his shoulder, suggested she was asking about something more fundamental. "Yes," Cristiano said simply, "so that you can stay." As evening fell, Yanka lay in the hospital bed watching the monitors trace her baby's heartbeat in green lines across the screen. The contractions had slowed but not stopped, a constant reminder that everything she'd begun to hope for hung in the balance. "You should go home," she told Cristiano, though the thought of being alone made her chest tighten with panic. "Get some real sleep. I'm not leaving." His voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. "I already lost one family in a hospital. I'm not losing another." The word, family, hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because of how desperately she wanted it to be true. "Cristiano?" she started, but he shook his head. "No, let me say this. I know what our arrangement was supposed to be. I know you were supposed to carry this baby and then walk away, but that's not what this is anymore, and we both know it." He leaned forward, his grey eyes intense in the harsh hospital lighting. "I'm in love with you, Yanka. Not just grateful, not just attracted to you, but completely, terrifyingly in love with you." Tears she'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over. "You can't say that. Not now. Not like this. What if the baby..." "The baby is going to be fine," he said fiercely. "And when it is, when we get through this, I want you to know that I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay, not because of the baby, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be someone's family. What if I mess it up? What if I run when things get hard? Then I'll come find you," he said simply. And I'll keep finding you until you believe that you're not alone anymore." The monitors around them continued their electronic symphony, but all Yanka could hear was the sound of her own heart breaking open. Not with loss, but with the terrifying possibility of love. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both natural and revolutionary. "I've been trying not to, but I do. I love you and I love this baby, and I'm scared that wanting something this much means I'm going to lose it." Cristiano moved from his chair to sit on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb the wires and monitors. "You're not going to lose us," he said, brushing tears from her cheeks with gentle fingers. "We're going to get through this together. Promise me," she said, gripping his hand. "Promise me that if something happens to the baby, it won't change this. That you won't look at me and see failure." "I promise," he said without hesitation. "And I need you to promise me something too." "What?" "Promise me you'll stop running. Promise me you'll stay and fight for this, for us, even when it gets scary." Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking over Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise. Somewhere in the distance, life was going on, people waking up, making coffee, starting their ordinary days. But here, in this room filled with monitors and medical equipment, and the weight of everything they'd finally admitted, nothing would ever be ordinary again. "I promise," Yanka whispered, and as Cristiano leaned down to kiss her forehead, as the baby's heartbeat continued its steady rhythm on the monitor, she realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was exactly what your heart needed most. Sometimes you had to stop running and start believing that you deserved to be caught. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other but would change everything, Janka's water broke while she was folding baby clothes. She'd been on modified bed rest since the hospital scare, spending her days in the main house where Cristiano could keep an eye on her. The guest house had become storage for baby supplies, a crib they'd assembled together, tiny clothes in soft colors, blankets that smelled like hope and possibility. "Cristiano," she called calmly from the living room, where she stood in a puddle of amniotic fluid, holding an impossibly small yellow onesie. "It's time." He appeared in the doorway, dish towel still in his hands, and took in the scene with the practiced calm that had gotten them through 6 weeks of uncertainty. "How do you feel?" he asked, already reaching for the hospital bag they'd kept packed by the door. "Ready?" she said, and meant it. After weeks of fear and waiting, after midnight conversations about names and futures and what their family would look like, she was finally ready to meet the baby who'd brought them together. The drive to the hospital was different this time. No sirens, no panic, just the quiet anticipation of something long-awaited finally arriving. Janka's contractions were strong but manageable, and between them, she found herself studying Cristiano's profile as he drove. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching her watching him. "How different everything is from that first day at the diner." She shifted in her seat as another contraction built. "I thought I was just agreeing to carry a baby for 9 months, and instead you got stuck with me," he said with a small smile. "I wouldn't call it stuck." She reached for his hand as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "I'd call it found." "Doctor." Santos was waiting for them in the delivery room, her calm presence immediately soothing Janka's nerves. The next several hours passed in a blur of contractions and coaching, of Cristiano holding her hand and whispering encouragements, of the overwhelming intensity of bringing life into the world. "I can see the head," Dr. Santos announced. "One more push, Janka." With Cristiano's hand in hers and her own determination fueling her, Janka pushed with everything she had left, and then, suddenly, the room filled with the sound she'd been waiting 8 months to hear, a baby's first cry, strong and indignant and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Dr. Santos said, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the baby on Janka's chest. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Janka looked down at the tiny face scrunched against her chest, dark hair, skin still red from the effort of being born, eyes squeezed shut against the bright world she'd just entered. She was perfect in a way that made everything else fade away. "She's so small," Cristiano whispered, his voice rough with tears. "She's perfect," Janka corrected, running a gentle finger over the baby's impossibly soft cheek. Dr. Santos worked quietly around them, handling the medical necessities while allowing them this first precious moment as a family, because that's what they were now, Janka realized. Not a business arrangement, not a temporary situation, but a family born from grief and hope and the kind of love that surprised you when you least expected it. "What's her name?" Dr. Santos asked softly. Janka looked at Cristiano, seeing her own overwhelming emotion reflected in his grey eyes. They'd discussed names during the long weeks of bed rest, but somehow none of them had felt right until now. "Hope," Cristiano said suddenly, the name coming out like a prayer. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Ellis Moore," Janka added, including her own surname without thinking about it, making the baby theirs in a way that went beyond paperwork. "Hope Ellis Moore," Dr. Santos repeated, making a note in her chart. That's a strong name for a strong little girl. Later, after Hope had been cleaned and measured and declared perfectly healthy, after the nurses had given them privacy and visiting hours had ended, Janka and Cristiano sat together in the quiet hospital room, taking turns holding their daughter. "I need to tell you something," Janka said as she watched Cristiano cradle Hope with the careful reverence of someone who understood how precious life could be. He looked up, concern flickering across his face. "The contract," she continued, "I know what it says about after the birth, about me leaving." Cristiano went very still. "Janka, I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I know we'll need to figure out the legal stuff, make it official somehow, but I'm not walking away from this. From her. From you." Relief flooded his expression, followed by something that looked like pure joy. "Are you sure? Because once you decide to stay, I'm not letting you change your mind." "I'm sure." She reached for his free hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become natural to them. I spent 8 years running from everything that mattered, because I was afraid of getting hurt. But you know what I realized? What? Getting hurt is worth it if it means getting to love someone. And I love you, Cristiano Moore. I love you and I love our daughter, and I want to build something real with you. He leaned over to kiss her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, careful not to wake the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. I love you too, he whispered against her lips. Both of you, more than I ever thought I could love anything again. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, life was going on as usual. But here in this room everything had changed. A baby had been born, a family had been created, and two people who'd thought they were too broken to love again had discovered that sometimes the best things grow from the cracks. What happens now? Janka asked, looking down at Hope's sleeping face. Now we go home, Cristiano said simply. But we take our daughter home, and we figure out how to be a family. I like the sound of that, Janka said, and as Hope stirred in her father's arms, making the soft sounds that newborns make when they're dreaming, Janka thought about all the roads that had led her here, all the losses and fears and temporary homes that had somehow brought her to this moment, this man, this perfect little girl who would never doubt that she was wanted, loved, and home. Sometimes, she realized, the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach, and sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that began with a contract and ended with forever. 2 years later, the sound of bare feet running across hardwood floors woke Janka before the sun did. She opened her eyes to find Hope standing beside the bed, her dark curls still messy from sleep, clutching the worn stuffed elephant that had become her constant companion. At 2 years old, Hope had inherited her father's grey eyes and her mother's stubborn independence, along with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. "Mama, up!" Hope demanded, reaching chubby arms toward the bed. "It's still early, baby girl," Janka whispered, but she was already lifting Hope onto the mattress, settling her between herself and Cristiano, who was just beginning to stir. "Entirely too early," Cristiano mumbled into his pillow, but his arm automatically came around both of them, pulling his girls closer. This had become their morning ritual, Hope climbing into bed before dawn, the three of them stealing a few more minutes of warmth and togetherness before the day demanded their attention. The bed that had once felt too big for one lonely man now perfectly fit a family. Through the bedroom window, Janka could see the vineyard stretching toward the hills, the grapevines heavy with fruit ready for harvest. It was their third harvest together, and she still felt a thrill of ownership when she looked out at the land that had become home in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Dada, coffee," Hope announced, patting Cristiano's cheek with the imperious authority of a toddler who knew she was adored. "Coffee for the princess coming up," Cristiano said, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. He looked different now. The lines around his eyes came from laughter instead of grief, and the careful distance he'd once maintained had been replaced by the easy affection of a man who'd learned to trust happiness again. Downstairs, the kitchen filled with the familiar sounds of their morning routine, Hope sat in her high chair, chattering to her stuffed elephant while Cristiano made coffee and Janka prepared breakfast. The guest house had been converted into Cristiano's workshop years ago, its original purpose served and transformed into something new. "Dr. Santos called yesterday," Janka mentioned as she flipped pancakes. "She wants to schedule Hope's checkup for next week. Everything okay?" Cristiano's voice carried the slight edge it always held when discussing anything medical, a father's protective instinct honed by experience. "Everything's perfect," Janka assured him. "She just wants to see how tall our little giant has gotten." Hope had indeed grown tall for her age, with sturdy legs that carried her everywhere at a run and a vocabulary that impressed everyone who met her. She was healthy, curious and completely unaware that she'd been the catalyst for a love story that had saved 2 broken hearts. "Speaking of Dr. Santos," Cristiano said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs and orange juice into Hope's sippy cup, "she mentioned something interesting at the farmer's market last weekend." "Oh," Janka raised an eyebrow, recognizing his tone. "She said she's been thinking about retiring, moving closer to her daughter in San Diego." He paused, studying Janka's face. "But she also said she'd been hoping to find the right couple to take over her practice, people who understand what it means to fight for family." Janka nearly dropped the spatula. "Cristiano, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" I'm saying that you've learned more about high-risk pregnancies in the past 2 years than most people learn in medical school. I'm saying you have a gift for making people feel safe when they're scared. And I'm saying that if you wanted to go back to school, become a nurse practitioner or midwife, he shrugged, we could make it work. The idea hit her like lightning, unexpected, illuminating, and suddenly making everything clear. She thought about all the women she'd met in Dr. Santos's waiting room over the years, all the couples facing the same fears she and Cristiano had once navigated. She thought about her own hands learning to comfort, her own voice learning to soothe, her own heart learning that sometimes the most meaningful work came from sharing your scars. You'd really support that, the schooling, the time away, all of it. Yanka. Cristiano set down his coffee mug and moved to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist as she leaned back against his chest. I'd support you in anything that makes you happy. We both would. Both, she asked, laughing as Hope clapped her hands and shouted, Mama School, as if she'd been following the entire conversation. She's already planning to be your first patient, Cristiano said, pressing a kiss to the side of Yanka's neck. Aren't you, huh, Hope? Mama help babies, Hope declared with the certainty of someone who'd clearly overheard more adult conversations than they'd realized. Later that morning, after breakfast and after Hope had been dressed and entertained, Yanka found herself walking through the vineyard alone. It was something she did when she needed to think, to process, to remember how far she'd traveled from the woman who'd stepped off a Greyhound bus 3 years ago with everything she owned in 2 duffel bags, the woman who'd been running from attachment, from hope, from the possibility of building something permanent, the woman who'd thought love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now, as she walked between rows of grapevines heavy with fruit, she could hear Hope's laughter floating from the main house, where Cristiano was probably building elaborate block towers for her to knock down. She could smell the bread she'd put in the oven before her walk, could see the laundry hanging on the line, domestic details that had once felt foreign and now felt like home. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former client, a small business owner whose books she still handled remotely. Hope you and the family are well. Still the best accountant I've ever worked with, even part-time. She smiled, typing back, we're wonderful. Talk soon. Part-time work, full-time mother, potential student. Her life had become beautifully complicated in ways she'd never anticipated. And at the center of it all was a love that had grown slowly, carefully, from the space between grief and hope. There you are. She turned to find Cristiano walking toward her, Hope on his shoulders, both of them grinning like they'd just shared a secret. We come find Mama, Hope announced, as if this had been a great adventure rather than a walk across their own backyard. You found me, Yanka said, reaching up to tickle Hope's dangling feet, earning a squeal of delight. We were thinking, Cristiano said, settling Hope on the ground where she immediately began collecting interesting rocks. Maybe it's time for a family trip. Oh, where did you have in mind? Montgomery. The word hit her like a gentle blow, carrying all the weight of a past she'd spent years running from. Montgomery, Alabama, home of magnolia trees and childhood memories, her parents' graves and her grandmother's house that probably still sat empty, waiting. I know it's been hard to think about going back, Cristiano continued quietly, but Hope should know where she comes from, both sides of her story. Yanka felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude of being known so completely. He understood that her reluctance to visit Alabama wasn't about forgetting her past, but about being strong enough to face it. You think I'm ready? She asked. I think you've been ready for a while. You just needed to realize it. Hope had wandered a few feet away, chattering to herself as she examined a particularly interesting grapevine. In the afternoon light, with her dark curls catching the sun and her small hands gentle with the leaves, she looked like a perfect blend of both her parents, Cristiano's thoughtfulness, Yanka's determination, and something entirely her own. Look, Mama, Hope called, holding up a cluster of grapes that had grown within her reach. Pretty, very pretty, baby girl, Yanka called back. Just like you. We could visit your parents' graves, Cristiano said softly. Let Hope meet her grandparents, even if it's just in story and memory. The idea of standing at her parents' graveside with her own family, of telling Hope about the grandparents who would have adored her, felt both healing and right. For years, she'd carried her grief alone. Now she could share it, let it become part of their family story, instead of a secret burden. I'd like that, she said. So I think it's time. That evening, after Hope had been bathed and read to and tucked into her crib with her elephant, Janka and Cristiano sat on their front porch, watching the sun set over the vineyard. The guest house stood empty now, but sometimes Janka still looked at it and remembered the woman who'd first walked through its door, scared, alone, convinced that attachment was dangerous. "Do you ever miss it?" Cristiano asked, following her gaze. "The freedom of not being tied down." Janka considered the question seriously. Did she miss the ability to pack everything she owned and disappear? Did she miss the simplicity of having no one to worry about but herself? "No," she said finally. "I don't miss being free. I was never free. I was just scared. There's a difference. And now? Now I'm brave enough to stay, brave enough to build something, brave enough to let people love me and to love them back, even though it's terrifying." Cristiano reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become their signature. "I'm proud of you, for everything you've become, everything you've built." "We've built," she corrected. "None of this would exist without you." "I think you're wrong about that," he said thoughtfully. "You would have found your way eventually. You're stronger than you know." "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find it alone." Inside the house, Hope's baby monitor crackled softly with the sounds of a child settling into sleep, little sighs and the rustle of blankets and the occasional soft word spoken to her elephant. Soon there would be quiet, and Janka and Cristiano would go inside to their own bed, to their own dreams, to the life they'd built one careful day at a time. "Sire Cristiano," she said as they stood to go inside. "Yeah, I want to tell you something I've never told you before." He paused, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" "The day I met you at the diner, I almost walked away. I sat in that booth for 10 minutes before you arrived, and I almost left. I was so scared of getting attached to anything, even a business arrangement." "What stopped you?" Janka smiled, remembering that moment of decision that had changed everything. "Hope. Not our hope, but the idea of hope. I realized I was tired of running from possibility." "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of all the tomorrows they were still planning together. "Me too." Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask about how her parents met, they would tell her about contracts and coincidences, about grapes and guest houses, about two people who were brave enough to let love grow in the space between what they expected and what they found. They would tell her about choosing each other, every day, in the small moments and the big ones. They would tell her that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth fighting for. And they would tell her that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that begin with business and end with family, that start with fear and end with home. But for now, as they walked hand in hand into the house where their daughter slept peacefully, where the kitchen still smelled like the bread they'd baked together, where the walls held photographs of a family that grew from hope itself, Janka simply felt grateful. Grateful for the bus ticket that had brought her here, grateful for the contract that had become a promise, grateful for the man who taught her that home wasn't a place. It was a choice you made every day to stay and fight and love and build something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. Outside, the vineyard settled into evening quiet, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of life continuing, owls calling, wind through leaves, the eternal rhythm of a world that kept turning, kept growing, kept offering second chances to those brave enough to take them. And in a house filled with love and laughter and the sweet dreams of a little girl named Hope, a family slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to choose each other all over again. It was, Janka thought as sleep claimed her, exactly the kind of love story she'd always hoped was possible, but had never dared to believe she deserved, until now. Karastitsia, what did you learn from this story? Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place? Would you have made the same choice as Janka? Your participation in our channel is very important to us. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.